The strong unwillingness in his heart caused Tu Meng's eyes to almost split apart, and blood flowed from them. He didn't give up on resisting. Bang! The enormous golden axe in his hand emanated monstrous divine radiance and surged like an ocean, and it swept through the surroundings with an extremely shocking impetus. If this strike had been executed in the outside world, then it would be sufficient to make the hearts of most universe-enlightened ancestral gods tremble and be powerless to resist it. However, it was precisely such an attack that was actually unable to break through the thick blood-red chains that were smashing down towards him. Rumble! The two collided and caused a world-shaking rumbling to resound. Divine radiance shot towards the surroundings while space was crushed into powder. A mouthful of blood suddenly sprayed out of Tu Meng's mouth while his extremely robust figure was blasted 3 kilometers away like a rocket before smashing forcefully onto the ground. Bang! The ground split apart from the impact. One could clearly see that the bones within Tu Meng's entire body emanated ear-piercing sounds of friction from being unable to endure such pressure. Even though he'd resisted this attack, but blood flowed from both his mouth and nose, and he was in an extremely sorry and miserable state. This clearly showed how terrifying the might of Lung Xinghuan's blood god restriction was. He actually resisted it. Lung Xinghuan was slightly surprised. In his opinion, this strike of his would be sufficient to eliminate Tu Meng, yet he'd never imagined that Tu Meng was actually so tenacious. After that, a wisp of disdain arose on the corners of Lung Xinghuan's mouth as he sighed. Why go to such trouble? If you continue struggling, then you'll only suffer even more pain and be bound to be unable to turn the situation around. I advise you to accept your fight, because I don't want to waste even more time on you. His voice was filled with a tone of absolute control. Rumble! As he spoke, strands of thick and large golden chains surged out from space once more, and they formed a dense mass that covered the heavens and the earth as they enveloped down onto Tu Meng. Tui! Tu Meng's eyes were bloodshot, and he spat forcefully. Even if it was at a moment of imminent danger like this, he still seemed extremely stubborn and was filled with disdain towards Lung Xinghuan. But in his heart, he was very clearly aware that he was powerless to resist this attack. I'll fucking kill all of you bastards one day. As he gazed at the blood-red chains that enveloped down towards him, and as he gazed at the disdain and coldness in the expressions of Lung Xinghuan and the others, Tu Meng let out a roar that shook the heavens and the earth while his voice was filled with hatred and anger. Swoosh! Right at this critical moment, a wisp of sword chi suddenly appeared out of thin air before Tu Meng, and it slashed down. This wisp of sword chi appeared so swiftly and so suddenly that it seemed as if it was hiding in that expanse of space since the beginning and was accumulating force while waiting to be released, and it caused Lung Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, and the others to be taken by surprise. After that, a string of ear-piercing and deafening explosions resounded and swept through the surroundings. In the next moment, Tu Meng opened his eyes wide. In his field of vision, the thick blood-red chains that were descending towards him had actually been forcefully severed, blasted into pieces, and transformed into a rain of light that dispersed towards the surroundings. What? Tu Meng was stunned by this sudden and unexpected event. Let's go! In the next moment, his body was carried by a strand of enormous force, while an extremely familiar voice sounded out by his ears. In an instant, Tu Meng understood everything, and he was excited and delighted to the extreme. Young martial ancestral uncle. Young martial ancestral uncle has arrived. Tu Meng didn't struggle, and his body was swiftly teleported away. All of this was too sudden. Since that wisp of sword chi appeared, to the moment it slashed the blood-red chains apart and Tu Meng was rescued, everything had occurred in practically an instant. Lung Xinghuan and Donghuang Yinchuan's reactions were clearly the fastest. However, when they intended to make a move, they saw Tu Meng had already been teleported away by a streak of light, and it was flashing towards the distance. Humph! A cold glow flowed in Lung Xinghuan's eyes. Looks like it was that fellow Chun Shi. Our luck isn't bad. We were able to use Tu Meng to make this fellow show himself. It's a really good deal. Donghuang Yinxian held a smile on the corners of his mouth, and his gaze burned with slight excitement. Pursue them. The target has shown himself. Now, It all depends on our own ability. Calm down, calm down. As he spoke, Donghuang Yinxian flicked his sleeve, and then a strand of green divine radiance floated up into the sky before it transformed into a shuttle-shaped vessel that surged with chaotic qi. The clear void vessel. It was a natural spirit treasure that was rumored to possess the might to traverse the cosmos like a flash of light, and its speed was so swift that it was beyond imagination. The others instantly recognized this treasure and their spirits were refreshed. Because with this treasure in their possessions, why would they worry about being unable to catch up to Chen Shi? Without any hesitation at all of them ascended the clear void vessel under Donghuang Yinxuan's lead and swiftly tore through the sky. In an instant, they completely vanished. It was the last day of the Tao discussion, and everything that occurred on this day was bound to affect the hearts and minds of all the cultivators in the outside world. So, most of the cultivators in the outside world had been paying attention to this area since Tu Meng had been encircled. After that, they watched as Tu Meng was defeated. Chen Shi lent a hand, and then a pursuit was launched. It could be said that the gazes of everyone in the outside world had been drawn over at this moment. I never expected that such a battle would occur right after dawn arrived. This time, would Chen Shi and the others be able to persist until the end while being pursued by all the experts of the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute? It seems really dangerous to me. Presently, Chen Shi isn't just carrying Gu Yan, who'd heavily injured and hasn't recovered. He has to take care of Tu Meng, whom he just rescued as well. Even if he possesses extraordinary ability, how would he fight them? Exactly. Under such circumstances, merely the joint forces of Leng Xinghuan and Donghuang Yinxian were sufficient to crush them with ease. Not to mention that all the experts of the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute are following by their sides. The gap in strength is truly too huge. Alas, why has this occurred? I was thinking that Chen Shi would be able to persist until the second round of the Tao discussion and fight for supremacy with the other experts. Yet now it would seem like the chances for that to occur is extremely tiny. The cultivators in the outside world discussed animatedly, whereas Convergence Hall was deathly silent. No one spoke. Regardless of whether it was Lei Fu, Qisongzi, Wenting, Yuzhen, Huaikongzi, or the others, all of them were staring fixedly at the battle that had just started, and they couldn't be bothered to pay attention to anything else. This battle carried great meaning. One Chen Shi failed, then it meant that all the disciples of Oracle Mountain would have been eliminated from the Tao discussion. Moreover, based on the current situation, it was obviously extremely likely that such a situation occurred. After all, Chen Shi was all alone, and he even had to take care of Gu Yan and Tu Meng, who were heavily injured. So, the situation he was in could be said to be dangerous to the extreme. On the other hand, the forces of the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute were vast and mighty. Not only did they possess peerless leading figures like Donghuang Yinxian and Leng Xinghuan, all the other disciples of these two powers were amongst them as well. When the two forces were compared, the gap between them was obvious. So, Chen Shi's group of three had very slim chances of being able to persist until the Tao discussion came to an end. Why is this happening? The Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute are truly shameless. Chen Shi, you much persist. At the spectating area on the square of Vai, the hearts of Shintu Yenran, Lu Wuhan, Yu Qiujing, Zhuan Yushui, and the others had constricted as they were extremely worried for Chen Shi. It wasn't just them, numerous great figures that had relationships with Chen Shi like Imperial Monarch Xinwu, Imperial Monarch Ziwei, and the others frowned endlessly as well. But no matter what, a common view had formed amongst the cultivators of the outside world, and it was that Chen Shi's group was in imminent danger. Bang! Because his speed was too swift, violent and ear-piercing sounds of rumbling and shattering resounded from space. If one looked down from the sky, one would notice that a completely straight path of destruction that was extremely horrifying had been left behind in space. Meanwhile, Tu Meng had recovered his calm from his previous excitement, and when he saw Gu Yan, who was still heavily injured, lying on Chen Shi's back, he instantly realized that the situation was severe. He took a deep breath and seemed to have made some sort of decision. He gritted his teeth and said, "Martial ancestral uncle, put me down and leave with senior brother Gu Yan. I, Tu Meng, will strive to win an opportunity for both of you even if I have to fight with my life on the line. As he spoke, Tu Meng actually started struggling to split up with Chun Shi. Shut your mouth. Chun Shi's face sank. If you dare do that, then I'll definitely expel you from Oracle Mountain. Tu Meng was stunned, and his expression changed indeterminately. He was just about to speak when he was interrupted by Gu Yan. Don't disturb Martial Ancestral Uncle. If Martial Ancestral Uncle could bear to let you do that, then Martial Ancestral Uncle didn't have to take the risk of rescuing you just now. Could it be that you still don't understand Martial Ancestral Uncle's intentions? Tu Meng opened his mouth. He was both moved and ashamed in his heart. He felt that he was too useless and dragged both Chun Shi and Gu Yan down with him. That's enough. What you have to do now is obey Martial Ancestral Uncle's instructions. Gu Yan seemed to understand Tu Meng's feelings and said, there's no need to feel regretful. Even if we lose this time, we'll have many opportunities to get revenge in the future. Yes, Tu Meng nodded forcefully. Chun Shi couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief in his heart when he saw this. He was truly worried that Tu Meng would be stubborn, because then it would be difficult for him to deal with the situation. Suddenly, a wave of strange and sharp spatial fluctuations resounded, and it came from extremely far away. Chun Shi's heart instantly shook. His Dao Seal mark instantly captured a green shuttle-shaped vessel that was suffused with chaotic qi. Obviously, it was a natural spirit treasure that excelled in speed. Shockingly, Leng Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, and all the disciples of both the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute were on this vessel. The situation is bad. This discovery caused Chun Shi's expression to become extremely grim because he'd utterly never imagined that they would catch up so quickly. Shit! They're catching up. Meanwhile, Gu Yan and Tu Meng noticed this as well, and their expressions changed. There's no need to worry. Leave it to me. Chun Shi took a deep breath while his eyes that were deep like abysses surged with a wisp of a resolute and cold expression as if he'd made some sort of decision. Chun Shi, I never expected that up until this point in the Tao discussion. We were actually only able to meet on the last day. The tricks of destiny are truly unfathomable. Donghuang Yinxuan's carefree voice resounded through the heavens and the earth. However, in my opinion, this is sufficient, because you'll be unable to escape this time. His voice was filled with a strand of extremely strong confidence. Bang! His voice hadn't finished resounding when Donghuang Yinxian had attacked ferociously. He stood upright on the clear void vessel while he flicked his sleeve, causing a violet sun to soar into the sky and emanate boundless light. After that, it smashed down violently towards Chun Shi, who was in the distance. The violet sun soared into the sky and glowed brilliantly, and it dyed the heavens and the earth in an expanse of strange violet color. In this expanse of the heavens and the earth, the mountains and rocks swiftly melted. The plants were incinerated into ash, and the entire heavens and the earth seemed to have fallen into a turbulent furnace. Moreover, a myriad of violet waves of flame seethed and surged like an ocean of violet-colored flames. The Grand Violet Sun Devil Suppression Technique. Leng Xinghuan's eyelids twitched. He seemed to have never expected that Donghuang Yinxian would actually execute such a supreme technique upon attacking, because this wasn't a probing attack. Donghuang Yinxian had utilized his true strength with the intention of taking Chun Shi's life. Rumble. The violet sun blazed. Everywhere it passed, everything was incinerated, and its speed was extremely swift, allowing it to instantly arrive above Chun Shi. Clang! Chun Shi's eyes narrowed while the banisher suddenly left its sheath, and then a simple and natural strand of sword chi slashed out. The profound heart sword technique, dismemberment style. Bang! The violet sun was slashed into two, causing sparks to spray into the surroundings. Even though this attack hadn't harmed Chen Shi, it caused his speed to clearly weaken by a trace, and the clear void vessel seized this opportunity to press down upon Chen Shi. Your strength really isn't bad. Receive another strike of mine. Donghuang Yinxian smiled light-heartedly when he saw this, and he suddenly grasped his slender and fair palm, causing another violet sun to soar into the sky. One could easily discern that this violet sun possessed surging might, and it was clearly much stronger than the violet sun from before. As soon as it appeared, The heavens and the earth fell into chaos while a terrifying aura effused out and simply seemed as if it intended to completely melt this expanse of the heavens and the earth. Such a moment isn't suitable for a one-on-one battle. Lung Xinghuan's blood-red hair fluttered, and he'd actually attacked at the exact same moment. In an instant, a myriad of thick and large blood-red chains condensed into form and interweaved together like a cage of the Grand Tao, and then they smashed down towards Xianxia. The blood god Restriction. Obviously, he wanted to join forces with Donghuang Yinxian and end the battle swiftly, so as to prevent any unexpected events from occurring. Xianxia was in danger. All the cultivators in the outside world gasped and were visibly shocked. When peerless figures like Lung Xinghuan and Donghuang Yinxian joined forces, could any universe-enlightened ancestral god realm expert in the entire world resist their attack? It wasn't just that, besides the joint forces of these two experts, those disciples of the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute had attacked successively by either withdrawing divine artifacts or executing profound techniques. It wasn't that they felt Lung Xinghuan and Donghuang Yinxian were unable to deal with Xianxia, and it was because they were clearly aware that at such a moment, they had to make the best use of their time to deal with Xianxia. After all, it was the last day of the Tao discussion. Once Xianxia seized an opportunity to escape, then the outcome would be difficult to determine. In this expanse of the heavens and the earth, a violet sun flashed through the sky, blood-red chains danced about, numerous divine artifacts whistled through the air, and all sorts of profound techniques rained down. It caused the entire world to fall into great chaos, and such a scene was astounding to the extreme. At this instant, it seemed as if time had stopped. When Ting's face swiftly turned pale, the faces of Shinta Yenran, Lu Wuhan, Yu Qiujing, and the others froze completely. The corners of Lei Fu and Qi Songzi's mouths carried a wisp of a complacent and satisfied grin. At this moment, she sensed a wisp of danger as well, and it caused the vital energy within his entire body to seethe and rumble without end. However, his expression still remained indifferent and calm, while his eyes were still icy cold and without any fluctuations of emotion at all. This time he didn't utilize the banisher, and he withdrew an umbrella instead. It was a natural spirit treasure passed down within the Jin clan in the Imperial region, the azure-light gold frame umbrella. In an instant, the umbrella enlarged itself by a few hundred times, and it emanated a myriad of strands of azure divine radiance that formed a shield before Xianxia's group. Bang! The violet sun, the thick and large blood-red chains, the divine artifacts, and the supreme techniques had practically instantly blasted on the umbrella. Amidst rumbling that shook the heavens and the earth, this expanse of the world collapsed as it was unable to endure the terrifying collision between these two forces, and everything within an area of 50,000 kilometers were even transformed into powder at the same time. Xianxia's entire body was struck by an extremely formidable force, causing his countenance to turn pale while he suddenly coughed up a mouthful of blood. He didn't resist this force and forcefully endured the risk of being injured, and he relied on it to flee once more while his speed was clearly much faster than before. He actually abandoned a natural spirit treasure for the sake of fleeing. Amidst the dust and dirt from the collision, a wave of disdainful sneers resounded. "Take the treasure, and then we'll continue pursuing him. Let me see how long he can flee for when we possess the clear void vessel." Donghuang Yinxian laughed coldly as he instructed. A disciple moved out with the intention of taking the azure-light gold frame umbrella. However, right at this moment, Lung Xinghuan seemed to have noticed something, and his pupils suddenly constricted while he said in a grim voice, "Flee! Quickly! Flee!" Many were stunned. Why would we need to flee at a time like this? Bang! Right at this instant, a deafening and terrifying explosion resounded through the heavens and the earth. The azure-light gold frame umbrella had actually suddenly exploded into pieces, causing an indescribable torrent of energy to sweep through the surroundings and envelop it. When looked at from afar, it was like a myriad of volcanoes had erupted in unison, and the ground cracked apart and collapsed. The terrifying might it created shocked many cultivators in the outside world to the point of crying out involuntarily with shock while their entire bodies shivered. It was too terrifying. Who would have imagined that a natural spirit treasure that was born from within the chaos and could only be chanced upon by luck had actually suddenly exploded by itself at this moment? Who could have imagined that an existence like a natural spirit treasure could actually be destroyed? Yet it was very obvious that all of this was done by Xianxia. Rumble. Divine radiance flowed and enveloped the surroundings. In this sudden explosion, 3 people had been caught off guard on the spot, and they were swept into the chaotic torrents from the explosion and were directly eliminated from the Tao discussion. 2 of these disciples were Power Seal disciples from the Divine Institute, while the other was a disciple of the Sovereign Sect. Moreover, they didn't even let out shrill cries. The consequences they faced were horrifying to the extreme. It wasn't just them who were affected. Even though Leng Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, and the others had avoided this calamity, they'd been affected by it and seemed to be in a rather embarrassing state. All of this was caused by the might of the explosion of a single natural spirit treasure. However, this was normal. At that day in Spectre Galaxy, even a figure like Imperial Monarch Nandu had suffered a heavy injury and almost perished before such might. When these 2 incidents were compared, the destructive force created by the destruction of the azure-like gold-frame umbrella was within reason. However, Leng Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, and the others were utterly unable to accept all of this. At this moment, their faces were gloomy while their eyes simply blazed with flames of rage, because they'd utterly never imagined that such an unexpected event would occur. Pursue them. We must eliminate that kid no matter the price. Leng Xinghuan's voice seemed as if it was squeezed out from the cracks between his teeth, and it carried extremely murderous hatred. Let's go. Donghuang Yinxian merely spoke a single word. In the next moment, he controlled the clear void vessel to carry the others and tear through the sky as it flashed ahead. At this moment, they truly hated Xianxia to the bone. He detonated a natural spirit treasure. My God, how did he accomplish that? Extravagance. Absolute extravagance. That was a natural spirit treasure. Earlier, numerous cultivators in the outside world were worried for Xianxia. However, when they witnessed this scene, they immediately seethed with excitement, and they were shocked to the point of being slightly dumbstruck. Who would have imagined that Xianxia's method to deal with this danger would actually be such an unusual method that caused such a huge commotion? What extravagance are you talking about? If I'm not wrong, that was the Jin clan's azure-like gold frame umbrella. Even if it's destroyed, how could Xianxia possibly feel a sense of loss? Ha! So that's how it is. Right. It should be the Jin clan that feels a sense of loss. But, in this way, Xianxia has completely offended the Jin clan. Someone pointed out the azure-like gold frame umbrella's origins, and it caused numerous cultivators to come to realization and chuckle without end. However, they had to admit that Xianxia's actions were extraordinary indeed, and if it was anyone else, that person would probably rather be eliminated than be willing to destroy a natural spirit treasure. Of course, even if they were willing to do that, they would probably be unable to accomplish it. After all, it was a natural spirit treasure, and very few people in the world were capable of completely destroying one, let alone causing them to bring forth such extraordinarily great might in the form of an explosion like Xianxia has. Good. When Ting and Yujin heaved sighs of relief. Since they'd started cultivating until now, they'd never been so anxious like they had been just now. Now, when they saw that Xianxia had temporarily got out from that predicament, their tense hearts had relaxed greatly. Humph! Lei Fu and Qi Songzi were slightly disgruntled, but they were similarly clearly aware that this pursuit hadn't come to an end. They didn't believe that Xianxia would be able to escape the joint pursuit of Leng Xinghuan and Donghuang Yinxian's groups. Before a mountain range with mountains of varying heights, Xianxia suddenly stopped moving. He swept the surroundings with his gaze, and then he descended into a gorge at the center of a group of mountains. Based on the current circumstances, they'd already locked onto us, so it's very difficult to escape any longer. Since it's like that, I can only utilize some other methods to deal with them. Xianxia took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed the ceaselessly seething vital blood within his body, and then he spoke with a serious expression. Martial ancestral uncle, what do you intend to do? Tu Meng couldn't help but ask this question. Set up a formation. As he spoke, Xianxia soared into the sky. As he flicked his fingers, numerous strands of sword qi shot out rapidly and swept towards the surroundings. In an instant, the mountains in an area of 50 kilometers were chopped off and transformed into level ground. After he finished doing all of this, Xianxia didn't hesitate to move in a profound manner and teleport through space. At the same time, he flicked his sleeve, causing expanse after expanse of dense and obscure talisman markings to spray out. Swish! 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 In an instant, talisman markings flowed throughout this expanse of the heavens and the earth. They formed a dense mass that was suffused with gorgeous divine radiance and illuminated the heavens and the earth. Ha! Xianxia made a sound through his lips. Rumble! An expanse of dense talisman markings interweaved together to swiftly form into a divine talisman diagram that resided at the east. The azure wood divine talisman. A wisp of shock couldn't help but suffuse Gu Yan and Tu Meng's eyes when they saw this. Divine talismans taking form in an instant. Such extraordinary attainments in the talisman Dao had exceeded their ability by too much. According to their knowledge, even if it was in Oracle Mountain, only existence at the Imperial Monarch realm like Wenting were capable of accomplishing this. Ha! 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 Right when Gu Yan and Tu Meng were shocked, numerous sounds resounded from between Xianxia's lips, and they echoed throughout the heavens and the earth. It was like a decree had descended from the heavens. In the next moment, numerous divine talisman diagrams surged into appearance out of thin air. They illuminated the heavens and the earth and emanated various formidable, imposing auras. They were respectively the White Metal Divine Talisman, the Blackwater Divine Talisman, the Crimson Fire Divine Talisman, the Yellow Earth Divine Talisman, the Dark Lightning Divine Talisman, the Phoenix Wind Divine Talisman, and the Demon Spirit Divine Talisman. 8 divine talisman diagrams resided at all 8 directions. Grand, obscure, and boundless fluctuations arose from them, while gorgeous and resplendent divine radiance flowed and completely covered this area. They cooperated with each other from afar and linked together to form a flawless grand formation of divine talismans. As soon as it was formed, it connected with the energy of the heavens and the earth before revealing all sorts of terrifying phenomena. The praise of the gods, sages reading scriptures, a myriad of golden flowers descending, brilliant light shooting into the sky, strands of the tune of the Tao resounding through the world. It caused this area to transform into what seemed like a paradise. This was the might of divine talismans when they connected to the energy of the heavens and the earth and summoned the strength of the gods. It was utterly impossible to accomplish this without the attainments of a talisman emperor in the talisman Tao. A formation. Amazing. Under such circumstances, only setting up a formation would allow them to have a chance to avoid this calamity. This is the inheritance in the talisman Tao from Oracle Mountain. It really is a rare sight. Such an aura is already capable of shocking the world and looking down upon most practitioners of the talisman Tao in the entire world. That's the divine talismans, the core inheritance of Oracle Mountain. It's truly unimaginable that Xianxia's attainments in the talisman Tao have actually arrived at such a height. As expected of the Grand Lord, Wu Xuechan's junior brother. Don't get happy too soon. It's only a formation in the end. I don't think that Xianxia can rely on it to obstruct Donghuang Yinxian and Leng Xinghuan's footsteps. When they witnessed everything that Xianxia had set up, it instantly caused countless uproars to arise in the surroundings. Some exclaimed with admiration while some were indifferent. But no matter what, most of the cultivators in the outside world felt their breath being taken away from witnessing the inheritance in the talisman Tao from Oracle Mountain. How could they have the opportunity to witness this scene at any other ordinary time? It was too rare. After he completed all of this, Xianxia didn't stop. Under the surprised gazes of everyone, he withdrew numerous treasures that emanated divine radiance and were suffused with chaotic qi. Surprisingly, they were all natural spirit treasures. My God! That's the Pei clan's Fifth Earth Apricot Yellow Flag. Look quickly. That's the Jin clan's Dragon Origin Pearl. Wait, isn't that the Luo clan's Black Spirit Sword? It isn't just those treasures. The Divine Blood Desolation Bell, the Ancient Soul Refinement Mirror, the copper coin of Treasurefall, the overarching heaven net. When they witnessed this scene, the outside world seethed with excitement while exclaims of shock arose throughout the outside world. It had caused a mighty uproar. The face of practically every single cultivator was covered in shock and disbelief. Who could have imagined that so many natural spirit treasures were actually hidden in Xianxia's possession? Moreover, most of these natural spirit treasure were renowned precious treasures that came from top-rate powers in the imperial region. Yet now, so many natural spirit treasures had appeared in Xianxia's possession. So, the shock it caused was obvious. There was no lack of members from the top-rate clans like the Gongya clan, Kunwu clan, Di clan, Pei clan, Luo clan, and so on and so forth present here. So, their faces instantly turned gloomy when they witnessed this scene, and a wisp of uncontrollable rage surged from their hearts. Because those were the treasures of their clans. Now, all of them had been utilized by Xianxia, and it caused their hearts to be on the verge of bleeding, yet they couldn't do anything about it. Xianxia had seized all of these natural spirit treasures while he was at the desolate Manka ruins all those years ago. If Xianxia was an ordinary cultivator, then they would have probably captured and killed him numerous times by now. But it just so happened that Xianxia was a personal disciple of Oracle Mountain, so they could only suffer such a huge loss and not dare ask for those treasures from Xianxia. What exactly does this fellow, Xianxia, intend to do with so many precious treasures? In next to no time, everyone felt extremely curious. Bang! Xianxia flicked his sleeve. The fifth earth apricot yellow flag suddenly transformed into a ray of light that shot into the yellow earth divine talisman. In an instant, the imposing aura of the entire divine talisman rose explosively, and it became even more indestructible. Gu Yan and Tu Meng were the first to react. They immediately discerned that Xianxia intended to utilize these natural spirit treasures as the cores of the formation and completely improve the might of these divine talismans. Bang! 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 Sure enough, Xianxia continued in the next moment, and he placed those natural spirit treasures in the other 7 divine talismans. After he completed all of this, the aura of the entire grand formation had swiftly risen steadily, and it became even more grand and boundless. At this point, Xianxia finally stopped and sat on the ground while gasping for breath. Moreover, his countenance had paled slightly. Since he started setting the formation up until now, all of this seemed easy, yet it actually exhausted more than half of Xianxia's strength. If he didn't have the divine dark parasol tree support and hadn't attained the 3rd forging of the True Heart Sutra, then he wouldn't even be able to complete all of this. Martial ancestral uncle. What's the name of this formation? Tu Meng asked curiously. Xianxia said casually, just call it the 8 extreme divine formation. As he spoke, he took a deep breath and sat down cross-legged. The grand formation had been completed. He had to take control of it in order to completely activate its might. I only hope we'll be able to rely on this formation to persist until the Tao discussion comes to an end. Xianxia's gaze was dark as he gazed towards the distance outside the formation. If I'm able to enter the 2nd round of the Tao discussion, then I'll definitely let those bastards from the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute feel my might. Tu Meng gnashed his teeth and spoke ferociously. Of course. Gu Yan's gaze was piercingly cold as well, and he had a murderous look in his eyes. Earlier, he'd been constantly encircled and attacked, and he'd almost been eliminated from the Tao discussion. All of this hadn't happened because his combat strength was weak, and it was instead because the enemy was too huge in number. If it was a one-on-one battle, then he wouldn't be afraid even if it was against Lung Xinghuan or Donghuang Inxian. Be careful, they're here. Xianxia suddenly spoke at this moment. A formation? This kid is pretty formidable. He knows that it's impossible to escape, so he intends to make a last stand. Swish! The clear void vessel appeared out of thin air, and it arrived before the 8 extreme divine formation. When they saw the scene before their eyes, the eyes of Lung Xinghuan and Donghuang Inxian had narrowed, whereas the expressions of the other disciples were slightly unsightly. It was common knowledge that Oracle Mountain was renowned for its talisman Tao, and none could rival it. Under such circumstances, it would be impossible for anyone to feel happy upon encountering such a grand formation formed by divine talismans. Has anyone amongst you capable of discovering a flaw in this formation? Asked Lung Xinghuan. The disciples of both sects exchanged glances, and then they remained silent. There was no lack of existences skilled in the talisman Dao within their groups. However, how could they dare to vainly attempt to break open the formation before disciples of the Oracle Mountain? Lung Xinghuan frowned when he witnessed this, and then he suddenly looked at the formation and said coldly, Chan Shi, do you think that a single formation would be sufficient to allow all of you to avoid elimination? How would I know without giving it a try? Chun Shi spoke indifferently. He was able to clearly see Lung Xinghuan and all the others from within the formation. You're overestimating your ability. A disciple of the sovereign sect couldn't help but speak in a grim voice. If you have the guts, then stop acting like a coward. Could it be that the disciples of your Oracle Mountain only possess such ability? Tui, do you not know shame? I've never seen such shameless and despicable people like all of you. If all of you hadn't ganged up on me, then I would have fucking skinned all of you alive by now. Tu Meng spat fiercely before Chun Shi could speak. Lung Xinghuan frowned and stopped such a meaningless exchange of abuses. He said indifferently, Chun Shi, I can give you one last chance. Our objective is only you. So long as you're eliminated, then we can let those two companions of yours go. What do you think? Absolutely not. Gu Yan and Tu Meng spoke simultaneously. Lung Xinghuan paid no attention to this, and he just gazed at the formation as if he was waiting for Chun Shi's answer. Why don't I raise a condition as well? Chun Shi spoke calmly. Lung Xinghuan didn't hesitate at all and answered. Go ahead. Chun Shi said indifferently. How about you and Donghuang Yinxian give up in this Dao discussion with me? It's worth it to eliminate me in exchange for both your eliminations. A wisp of a ghastly glow arose in Lung Xinghuan's eyes, and he was truly infuriated. There's no need to waste your breath. If this continues, then it would only waste even more time. Donghuang Yinxian took a deep breath and said, Let's go all out. We'll be able to resolve all of this before the veil of night descends. All right. Lung Xinghuan was silent for a short moment before he lightly spat out a single word from between his lips. In an instant, Lung Xinghuan and Donghuang Yinxian attacked ferociously. The former withdrew a black jade ruler while the latter withdrew an ancient bronze sword, and they attacked the formation successively. At this moment, both of them had withdrawn their respective divine artifacts at the first possible moment. Obviously, they intended to go all out and destroy this formation in the shortest amount of time possible. This battle had erupted abruptly, and the crux of the battle was the 8 extreme divine formation. Rumble. When it suffered their attacks, the entire formation suddenly started fluctuating. Circle after circle of ripples arose while divine radiance flowed from it and illuminated the heavens and the earth. At practically the exact same moment, Chun Shi didn't hesitate at all to activate the might of the divine formation, and he resisted these attacks with full force. Its might doesn't seem to be as formidable as we expected. This attack allowed Lung Xinghuan to roughly determine the might of this formation that stood before him, and a wisp of a cold arc couldn't help but form on the corners of his mouth. Attack together. Don't hold back at all, he instructed in a low voice, and then he attacked once more. Rumble. The other disciples didn't dare slack off at all, and they attacked successively with all their ability. For a time, this expanse of the heavens and the earth was filled with world-shaking rumbling as all sorts of divine artifacts soared into the sky and emanated extremely dazzling and blazing radiance. In the divine formation, Chun Shi's expression was solemn while he sat cross-legged on the ground, and he controlled the formation to ceaselessly disperse and defend against the attack that charged towards it. Divine energy seethed throughout his body, while his entire body emanated blazing divine radiance. The divine energy in the universe within his body was like a torrent that ceaselessly surged into the formation and maintained its circulation. Unfortunately, this was the Tao Cauldron world, so there weren't any sources of energy that could act as the foundation of the formation. If he was in the outside world, then Chun Shi would be entirely capable of relying on the energy of the heavens and the earth as the source of the formation's energy. So dealing with all of these attacks would be as easy as blowing off dust. However, fortunately, He had the divine dark parasol tree within his body, and it was sufficient to ceaselessly provide divine energy to him, and it made up for this flaw to a large extent. But the disadvantage of this was that once the divine energy Chun she possessed was unable to endure the consumption required to maintain the formation circulation, then they would be in danger. This was what Chun she was most worried about. Before long, Chen Shi's worries had unfortunately become a reality. Under the impact of the full force attacks from Lung Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, and the others, the 8 extreme divine formation persisted for 30 minutes before some talisman structures within the formation had started to faintly show signs of being destroyed. Even though it was merely a small portion, but once it did collapse, then it would be like a fuse that would directly cause the entire formation to be destroyed. At this moment, Lung Xinghuan and the others who were attacking from outside the formation had clearly noticed this minute change, and their spirits were instantly refreshed. Continue the attack. Don't slack off. If nothing unexpected occurs, then this kid won't be able to persist for long. Don't be careless at such a moment. Lung Xinghuan shouted loudly in a deep voice. His blood-red hair fluttered while he revealed an oppressive and arrogant bearing, and his eyes were filled with a ghastly and ruthless expression. Bang! 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 All of their attacks grew even more terrifying. All sorts of divine artifacts and techniques sprayed out like a dense storm that covered the heavens and the earth. If this was the outside world, then merely this round of attacks would have probably been sufficient to obliterate a field of stars and cause an extremely terrifying calamity. At this moment, all the cultivators in the outside world were horrified by this scene, and they gasped without end. They're too formidable. If they didn't possess the defense of the divine formation, then it would probably be impossible to resist until now by relying solely on the combat strengths that Chun Shi's group of 3 possesses. Humph! They're just using numbers to bully Chun Shi's group. What's there to be shocked about? If it was Lang Xinghuan or Donghuang Yinxian that fell into a similar situation, then they would probably be even inferior to Chun Shi. I think that Chun Shi's methods are truly extraordinary. Even in such a dangerous situation, he was actually able to utilize the Tao of talismans to forcefully persist until now. It's truly surprising. No matter what, Chun Shi's group is in a disadvantaged position in the end, and the moment that divine formation is destroyed will probably be the moment they're eliminated from the Tao discussion. The crowd discussed animatedly. Most of them exclaimed with admiration at the ability in the talisman Tao that Chun Shi revealed, and they were unable to imagine how he'd accomplished all of this. Within Convergence Hall, Lei Fu and Qi Songzi frowned. Never had they imagined that even at a time like this, Lung Xinghuan and Donghuang Yinxian were still unable to put an end to Chun Shi's group with the combat strengths they possessed. I never expected that your young martial uncle's attainments in the talisman Tao would actually be so formidable. Even I'm unable to see through his ability. Yuzhen spoke in a slightly surprised tone via voice transmission. At the very least, I'm unable to accomplish this. When Ting spoke casually and seemed to be absent-minded, she was worried about Chun Shi. As an imperial monarch from Oracle Mountain, when Ting's attainments in the talisman Tao had naturally attained an extremely extraordinary state since a long time ago. However, after she witnessed Chun Shi's ability in setting up the formation, she instantly understood that if it was merely in terms of the Tao of talismans, then she was really unable to compare to Chun Shi. But even though she couldn't compare to Chun Shi in the talisman Tao, she was able to clearly discern that Chun Shi was really in danger this time. In the defensive formation diagram of the 8 extreme divine formation, some talisman structures had started to faintly show signs of collapse, and this wasn't a good sign at all. Especially when she saw Lung Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, and the others had sped up their attack at this moment and were madly blasting the formation. Her heart couldn't help but rise to her throat. Over 20 hours remain until this round of the Tao discussion comes to an end. Will Chun Shi and the others be able to persist until the end while suffering such attacks? It's a very dangerous situation. Even if she was unwilling, she had to admit that based on the current situation, if Chun Shi's group was unable to repair the weak points that had appeared in the formation, then not to mention 20 hours of time, they wouldn't even be able to persist for 2 hours. Even your inferior? Yuzhen was stunned, and she seemed to be shocked by this. However, in next to no time, She couldn't be bothered about all of this, and her gaze was instantly drawn over by a scene in the Tao Cauldron world. Especially when she saw what had happened. Her expression couldn't help but turn solemn. At this moment, at another area of the Tao Cauldron world, the disciples of Nuwas Tao Palace, who were led by Kong Yuran and Shi Yu, and encounter the disciples of the Tao Institute, who were led by Ye Chun and Yu Jihui. Moreover, a battle had erupted between them. As soon as this battle erupted, it instantly drew the attention of many cultivators towards it. It was even to the extent that numerous cultivators who were watching the battle between Xianxia's group and the group led by Leng Xinghuan and Donghuang Yinxian couldn't help but move their gazes away. The reason was actually very simple. The disciples of the Tao Institute and Nuwas Tao Palace were fighting head-on. They fought by utilizing their own ability and might, so it was especially interesting. On the other hand, the battle between Oracle Mountain and the joint forces of the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute was bound to be a battle where the number of members on each side was extremely unequal. Moreover, this battle, with an extremely great gap in strength, had transformed into a battle where the forces of the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute storms a divine formation with the intention of breaking through it. Thus, in terms of brilliance, it was much more inferior to the battle between Nuwas Tao Palace and the Tao Institute. Of course, this was only the opinion of the cultivators in the outside world. Moreover, to some cultivators that were paying special attention to Chen Shi, the battle that had erupted between Nuwas Tao Palace and the Tao Institute had given a signal. It signaled that based on the current situation, Chen Shi's group had fallen completely into a state where they were alone and without help because they were unable to receive the assistance of Nuwas Tao Palace any longer. In other words, Chen Shi's group of 3 could only rely on themselves to deal with this danger that they faced. Wen Ting had clearly noticed this as well, and her expression instantly turned extremely solemn. On the other hand, Lei Fu and Qi Songzi started laughing with pleasure. They weren't laughing with ridicule at Wen Ting, and they were laughing with ridicule at the Tao Institute instead because it had imperceptibly helped their Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute deal with a potential trouble of theirs, Nuwas Tao Palace. Huai Kongzi and the others didn't speak a word when they saw this, and it caused others to be unable to discern what exactly they were thinking. Rumble. Under the full forced attacks of Leng Xinghuan and Donghuang Yinxian, the 8 extreme divine formation had persisted for less than another quarter of an hour before a trace of a weak point finally appeared on it. Some talisman structures within one of the divine talisman diagrams had suddenly collapsed, causing its might to reduce greatly. Very good. Continue the attack. A wisp of bright light arose in Leng Xinghuan's eyes, and he was exceedingly proud of their success. On the other hand, within the divine formation, Chen Shi's brows knit together imperceptibly when this trace of a weak point appeared. He swiftly said, "Tu Meng, I need you to work together with me. Are you prepared? Martial ancestral uncle. Feel free to tell me what to do." Tu Meng stood up swiftly and spoke loudly. Earlier, he'd been constantly watching from the sidelines yet unable to help at all, and it caused him to feel extremely uncomfortable. "Do as I say. Now head to the Azurewood Divine Talisman. The 1327th structure in the talisman has been damaged. Repair it." Chen Shi guided swiftly. "Leave it to me." Tu Meng didn't waste his breath at all, and he received his orders and vanished swiftly. As a disciple of Oracle Mountain, he'd naturally obtained the inheritance of the 5-element divine talismans a very long time ago, and he was extremely familiar with the structure of its talisman markings. Bang! However, before Tu Meng could deal with it, a wave of world-shocking rumbling resounded, and then Chen Shi instantly noticed that the structure of more talisman markings had been damaged at another area of the formation. This caused Chen Shi's face to sink. If it continued according to this speed, then even if Tu Meng repaired it with all his might, the formation would still be unable to avoid complete destruction. What should I do? At this moment, Chen Shi felt a form of extreme pressure as well. Presently, he had to maintain the circulation of the divine formation with all his strength and resist the attacks that came from the outside world. So he was utterly unable to find the time to do anything else. "Martial ancestral uncle, let me do it." Suddenly, Gu Yan, who'd been meditating since the beginning, had spoken. "You?" Chen Shi frowned. With a single glance, he noticed that Gu Yan's injuries were still rather severe. So, if Gu Yan repaired the talisman formation diagram while under in such a state, then it might even harm his foundation in the Tao. Martial ancestral uncle, trust me. Let me do it. Gu Yan spoke firmly. So long as we're not eliminated, then this little bit of injuries is nothing. Xianxia remained silent for a short while, and then he stopped hesitating and said, the 37th talisman marking structure in the white metal divine talisman. Thank you, martial ancestral uncle. Before Xianxia could finish speaking, Gu Yan had stood up, taken a deep breath, and then turned around and left. As if he didn't want to make Xianxia worry. His backbone was straight like a spear at this moment while he revealed a composed bearing and emanated a wisp of strong confidence. What a stubborn fellow. A wisp of a smile arose on the corners of Xianxia's mouth. But right after that, he didn't have the time to think about all of this, and he immersed his entire concentration into controlling the formation. Xianxia was very clearly aware that it was obviously too difficult to persist until the Tao discussion came to an end if they relied solely upon the defense of the formation. However, in this situation before him, he could only act in this way, because they had no path of retreat any longer. It's sufficient so long as we're able to persist until dusk arrives. At that time, if worst comes to worst, I'll detonate all of these natural spirit treasures. A wisp of a rare, ruthless, and vicious expression flashed in Xianxia's eyes. Since the Tao discussion had begun, he'd been constantly encircled and attacked, and he'd been within the plot of the Sovereign Sect and the Divine Institute since the beginning. Not only was he unable to meet any other disciples from Oracle Mountain, the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute even caused many other disciples of Oracle Mountain to be successively eliminated. All of this had caused a ball of rage to accumulate in Xianxia's chest for a very long time because he'd never been in such a sorry state since he'd started cultivating until now. Even if it was when he was being pursued in Spectre Galaxy, he hadn't felt so furious and aggrieved. Martial ancestral uncle, I've finished repairing it. Tu Meng's voice sounded out from afar, and it caused Xianxia's spirits to be refreshed. Something's wrong. Why has that weak point vanished? Outside the formation, Leng Xinghuan acutely noticed that while under their full forced attacks, not only had the might of this divine formation not continues to weaken, but it even showed signs of recovering to its previous state. We're breaking the formation apart while they're repairing it. This is very normal. However, I'm surprised that Xianxia is actually able to maintain the circulation of this divine formation to such an extent by relying on his own ability, and he was even able to persist until now. This has truly exceeded my expectations. Donghuang Yinxian frowned as well. After all, this formation doesn't have a foundation, so it lacks a source of energy. Under such circumstances, Xianxia is keeping it active by utilizing his own divine energy. So, logically speaking, it would be utterly impossible for him to persist for too long. But up until now, almost 4 hours have passed, yet he actually shows no signs of weakening. This is slightly unusual. Could it be that this fellow possesses a treasure that's able to replenish huge amounts of divine energy? One of the other disciples couldn't help but ask this question. That's probably the case. Donghuang Yinxian nodded while he sighed in his heart. Never had he imagined that Xianxia would actually be so difficult to deal with, and even their joint forces were actually unable to do anything to Xianxia in a short period of time. This was simply inconceivable. Leng Xinghuan went silent when he heard Donghuang Yinxian. After a long time, he said coldly, "This Xianxia is difficult to deal with indeed. However, since we were able to blast open a trace of a weak point on the formation just now, it proves that he's holding on strenuously right now. We merely have to continue attacking, and he would probably be unable to persist for too long." As he spoke, Leng Xinghuan took a deep breath and said resolutely, "Don't hesitate and continue attacking. No matter what, we must eliminate this kid before the veil of night descends." Rumble. The battle continued, and it grew in intensity. This expanse of the heavens and the earth was filled with all sorts of divine radiance, and they were dazzling, resplendent, and illuminated the world. When facing such waves of attacks, Xianxia didn't dare slack off at all. He maintained the circulation of the divine formation with all his strength, and his enormous will sensed every single minute change within the formation as he was deeply afraid that even a trace of an error would occur. Tu Meng, the 136th talisman marking structure in the Phoenix Wind Divine Talisman. Gu Yen, the 301st structure in the Dark Lightning Divine Talisman. Tu Meng, the Crimson Fire Divine Talisman. Gu Yen. As the battle continued, the weak points that appeared on the 8 extreme divine formation gradually grew in number. Under such circumstances, Tu Meng and Gu Yen fully played the role of Xianxia's assistants, and they ceaselessly repaired the damaged talisman marking structures throughout the formation. Fortunately, both of them were from Oracle Mountain and had obtained the inheritance of divine talismans. So, even though their attainments in the talisman Tao couldn't compare to Xianxia, it was sufficient to crush most others in the outside world that cultivated in the Tao of talismans. Otherwise, this formation would have probably been completely destroyed a long time ago if Xianxia was all alone. But even then, as time flowed by, the pressure Xianxia felt gradually increased while his expression slowly became solemn. At such a moment, he didn't just have to maintain the circulation of the formation to resist the attacks of his enemies on the outside. He had to provide guidance to Tu Meng and Gu Yen to repair the talisman marking structures within the formation. So, the intensity of the pressure he endured was obvious. Even with his cultivation in the Tao heart that was extremely tenacious, it started feeling slightly strenuous for him, and if it wasn't for the endless supply of divine energy provided by the divine dark parasol tree, then he wouldn't have been able to persist until now. However, Xianxia was even more worried about Tu Meng and Gu Yen. Both of them had suffered injuries before this, and they were dragging along their injured bodies as they ceaselessly repaired the formation. So, comparatively speaking, it was even more strenuous for them. But they had no way out now, and they could only continue resisting stubbornly like this. Time flowed by unnoticed. In next to no time, a few hours had passed, and only 3 hours remained until the veil of night descended. During this entire process, all the cultivators in the outside world who were paying attention to this battle were shocked speechless, and they were filled with disbelief. Who could have imagined that while under such extremely adverse conditions, Xianxia and the others would actually be able to persist until now? This was too inconceivable and beyond imagination. It was like an impossible miracle, yet it had been created by Xianxia's group, and it was utterly unimaginable. Could it be that Xianxia and the others will really be able to persist until the end by relying on a divine formation? That might necessarily be the case. Persisting until now has probably caused Xianxia and the others to be on the verge of collapse. Have all of you not noticed? The divine formations might had clearly weakened greatly when compared to before. If Xianxia and the others are careless in the slightest, then it might cause severe and lethal consequences. It really is difficult to say. It isn't just Xianxia's group. Look at Lang Xinghuan and the others as well. They'd attacked continuously for a few hours now, and the consumption of their own energy is extremely great as well. Many of them are even showing signs of being unable to stand the exhaustion from this. But no matter what, it all depends on which side will be able to persist until the end. The cultivators in the outside world discussed animatedly. As spectators to the battle, they could witness the entire situation of the battle, and they could notice every single trace of minute change within the battle. However, up until now, even they were unable to determine exactly what the outcome of this drawn-out battle would be. Damn it! Why is it so difficult to destroy? It's simply even tougher than the shell of a primeval black tortoise. What should we do? Only 3 hours remain before the Tao discussion will come to an end. Outside the formation, many disciples of the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute frowned and cursed without end, and all of them were furious and had extremely gloomy expressions. They'd been attacking continuously for a few hours of time, yet they were actually unable to break through this divine formation. This was simply a humiliation for them, and they were extremely aggrieved and furious in their hearts. Most importantly, their strength had been consumed greatly, and they were on the verge of being unable to endure the consumption and fatigue. This was the worst part. They could naturally choose to rest, but in that way, they would similarly provide Xianxia's group with time to rest and recover. The Tao discussion would be coming to an end in another 3 hours of time, so how could they dare to slack off? At this moment, Donghuang Yinxian and Lang Xinghuan had gloomy expressions as well, and there wasn't a trace of a relaxed expression on their faces. This battle had erupted since early in the morning, and they'd originally thought that they would be able to eliminate all these disciples from Oracle Mountain in the shortest period of time, yet never had they imagined that the developments of the situation would be beyond their imagination. A single divine formation had actually kept them out for a few hours like an indestructible fortress. How could they have imagined that something like this would have occurred? Looks like I can only utilize. Lung Xinghuan had a vicious expression while he spoke coldly. However, he'd only spoken halfway when he seemed to have nothing something, and a wisp of shocking light suddenly erupted from his eyes. At this instant, Donghuang Yinxian seemed to have noticed it as well, and a wisp of a smile arose on the corners of his mouth. There, unable to persist longer, continue the attack. At full force, Lung Xinghuan shouted loudly. His clothes fluttered while he revealed an arrogant bearing, and he actually seemed like he'd taken an all-nourishing elixir as his attacks grew even more violent. They're unable to persist any longer? The other disciples immediately understood what this meant, and their spirits were instantly refreshed. Pooh! Within the formation, the figure of Gu Yen who was repairing the damaged talisman markings has suddenly stiffened on the spot, and then he actually couldn't help but cough up a mouthful of blood that was extremely dark red. Gu Yen, come back here. Xianxi's heart constricted, and he ordered in a low voice. Martial ancestral uncle, there's no need to pay any attention to me. It's just a tiny injury. I'm still able to persist. Gu Yen didn't even turn around. He took a deep breath and intended to stride off to continue repairing the formation. Swish! Suddenly, a strand of force swept over from behind him, and it brought Gu Yen back and dropped him on the ground before Xianxia. There's no need to force yourself. Leave it to me. Xianxia sighed lightly. Even though his voice was calm, it carried an indisputable tone. Gu Yen was stunned, and he felt extremely bitter in his heart yet stopped struggling. Tu Meng, you come back as well. Xianxia turned around and spoke to Tu Meng who was far away from them. Martial ancestral uncle, I'm fine. Tu Meng cried out loudly. Get back here. Xianxi's expression suddenly turned cold, and his voice carried a wisp of anger. In an instant, Tu Meng didn't dare insist any longer, and he stomped his foot forcefully before he returned with extreme unwillingness. After that, he sat on the ground dejectedly. Xianxia couldn't help but smile when he saw this. Could it be that both of you have so little confidence in your martial ancestral uncle? Both of them were stunned. Meanwhile, Xianxia stood up, took a deep breath and said, the might of the formation had arrived at its limits. Any more repairs will only be done in vain. Now, I can only adopt a different strategy in this battle. A different strategy? Both of them were stunned. Could it be that there's another way out of this situation? Convergence Hall. Yu Zhan, who was anxiously paying attention to the battlefield, heaved a sigh of relief in her heart and muttered, this is fine as well. If they fought to the point both sides are heavily injured, then it would allow others to benefit instead. It turned out that after going on for a few hours, the battle between Nuwas Dao Palace and the Dao Institute had come to an end at this moment. The outcome of the battle was unexpected. No casualties had arisen on either side, and the battle revealed an evenly matched situation. Perhaps it was exactly because of this that no matter if it was Kong Yuran, Shi Yu, Ye Chen, or Yu Jihui, all of them had very tacitly chosen to stop the battle. Because if the battle continued, then besides causing both sides to suffer heavy injuries, no side would be able to gain the upper hand against the other. This outcome utterly shocked the cultivators of the outside world as they'd never expected it. However, when one analyzed the battle carefully, one would notice that it was within reason. Because Nuwas Dao Palace merely possessed 7 disciples at this moment, whereas the Dao Institute wasn't any better, and it only possessed 9 disciples. If they fought to the bitter end, then very few of their disciples would be able to participate in the second round of the Dao discussion. Where are Kong Yuran and the others from Nuwas Dao Palace going? Look quickly. Ye Chen's group is actually heading towards the same direction as Kong Yuran's group. In next to no time, the cultivators in the outside world noticed that after the battle came to an end, Both the forces of Nuos Dao Palace and the Dao Institute had actually chosen the same direction, and this scene was extremely strange and mysterious. If they weren't clearly aware of the situation within the Dao Cauldron world, they would have almost suspected that both these powers had formed an alliance. That direction is. All of them moved their gazes all that direction, and then their pupils instantly constricted. The direction they were heading was actually the area where the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute were in battle against Oracle Mountain. Could it be that a chaotic battle between the 5 great powers is going to occur during these last 3 hours before the Dao discussion comes to an end? Everyone couldn't help but feel curious. Clang. Under the shocking gazes of Tu Meng and Gu Yen, Xianxia stretched out his hand and grabbed within the formation. And then a divine sword that was pitch black like the eternal veil of night swiftly flew up. Surprisingly, it was the Black Spirit Sword that acted as the core of the Dark Lightning Divine Talisman before this. What does Martial Ancestral Uncle intend to do? Both of them were puzzled. But in next to no time they came to an understanding. Xianxi's gaze was like a bolt of lightning as he flicked his sleeve. The Black Spirit Sword swiftly transformed into a dim black light that carried a peerlessly sharp and powerful aura as it instantly shot out from within the formation. However, after it lost the Black Spirit Sword, the Dark Lightning Divine Talismans might had instantly weakened by more than half. This caused both Tu Meng and Gu Yen to acutely notice something. Could it be that Martial Ancestral Uncle intends to make a last stand and fight them to the death? The Dao Cauldron world. Outside the formation, Lung Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, and the others suddenly noticed to their surprise that the formation's might had actually weakened greatly in an instant. An opportunity. A superb opportunity. Everyone's eyes lit up while a wisp of indescribable excitement arose in their hearts. Up until this point in this drawn-out battle, they'd already accumulated a bellyful of rage. So how could they not be excited when they finally saw an opportunity arise? Even figures like Lung Xinghuan and Donghuang Yinxian sighed with emotion at this moment because they felt that this battle was truly too difficult. Fortunately, their opponent was clearly unable to persist any longer, and the time for them to reap their gains was about to arrive. When they thought about how that damnable Xianxia and his group would be completely exposed before their blades once the formation was destroyed, a wisp of excitement that couldn't be restrained arose in their hearts. Attack! Lung Xinghuan roared loudly. However, his voice stopped abruptly right after he spoke this single word, because a peerlessly fierce ray of black light had suddenly torn through the air at this instant, and it had shot out violently from within the formation. The Black Spirit Sword. Lung Xinghuan's pupils dilated as he recognized this natural spirit treasure from the Luo clan. But this wasn't the main point, because at this instant, a scene had suddenly appeared in Lung Xinghuan's mind. A few hours ago, the azure-like gold frame umbrella had suddenly exploded, and it had caught them off guard and instantly eliminated 3 of their companions. At that time, even the rest of them had been affected by the blast, and they dodged it in an extremely sorry state. Would this sudden appearance of the Black Spirit Sword lead to such an explosion as well? When he thought up to here, Lung Xinghuan's heart constricted, and his expression changed while he instinctively shouted loudly in a grim voice. Evade! Quickly! All of this took a long time to describe, yet it actually occurred in an instant. It wasn't just Lung Xinghuan. Even the others couldn't help but recall the explosion from before. There was utterly no need for Lung Xinghuan to remind them when they'd already instinctively adopted an evasive strategy. Swoosh! 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 In an instant, all of them fled towards the distance like birds that were frightened at the sight of a bow. However, to their astonishment, the Black Spirit Sword hadn't exploded. After it charged out from the formation, it seemed like an emperor patrolling his kingdom, and it circled around before flying back towards the formation. This scene instantly became slightly embarrassing and amusing. It caused the expressions of Lung Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, and the others to change indeterminately while rage blazed within them, and a feeling of strong embarrassment arose in their hearts. The cultivators of the outside world were originally watching all of this with nervous expression. However, they couldn't help but be stunned, and then started roaring with laughter when they witnessed such an amusing scene. All of them had never imagined that Xianxia would actually dare to utilize such a method to play tricks on his opponents at such a critical moment. On the other hand, the reactions of Leng Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, and the others seemed to be a bit too cautious. They simply seemed to be extremely apprehensive and anxious, and it was amusing and laughable. Damnable bastard! He actually dared to play tricks on us. A disciple from the sovereign sect was simply enraged to the point of trembling. No matter what, we must eliminate that despicable bastard this time. He simply doesn't deserve to be a disciple of the Oracle Mountain for utilizing such despicable methods. The others felt utterly humiliated and stamped their feet with rage. Ha ha! Very good. Very good. Leng Xinghuan gritted his teeth as he laughed coldly. His voice sounded as if it had been squeezed out from the cracks between his teeth, and he hated Xianxia to the bone. When had he, Leng Xinghuan, lost face like this? Never. Don't waste your breaths. Destroy this formation first. At this moment, Donghuang Yinxian was filled with a murderous air as well. All of them were furious. They didn't hesitate at all to converge together once more. Swoosh! However, right when they intended to attack once more, a wave of spatial fluctuation arose once more, and then the Black Spirit Sword carried a terrifying strand of sword chi as it attacked once more. Again? The eyes of Leng Xinghuan and the others focused. Swish! In the next moment, they instinctively dodged towards the distance. Couldn't be helped, even if they were unable to confirm whether the Black Spirit Sword would explode. They didn't want to be eliminated at such a moment because it wouldn't be worth it. In the end, the Black Spirit Sword swaggered in a circle before swiftly returning to the formation. Damn it! Bastard! How despicable! You deserve death. In an instant, the corners of their mouths couldn't help but twitch. They felt like an invisible slap had been struck on their faces, and it burned with pain and had caused them to lose all face. On the other hand, all the cultivators in the outside world were simply on the verge of rolling on the ground with laughter when they witnessed this scene. None of them had expected that such an extremely tense and horrifying battle would actually reveal such amusing scenes in succession. Even Gu Yen and Tu Meng, who were within the formation, couldn't help but roar with laughter. Isn't martial ancestral uncle making fun of them a little too much? But those fellows are really cowardly. In Convergence Hall, when Ting Yuzhen, Huai Kongzi, and the others couldn't help but chuckle, but they didn't roar with laughter. However, Lei Fu and Qi Songzi's faces couldn't help but heat up, and they felt both infuriated and embarrassed when they noticed the smiles on the others' faces. Both of them cursed in their hearts. That little bastard, Xianxia, is simply too despicable. Of course, Qi Songzi and Lei Fu were rather displeased by the displays put on by Leng Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, and the others. Is there any need to be so anxious? Actually, if one thought about it calmly, then their reactions were within reason. After all, only 3 hours remained until the Tao discussion came to an end. Coupled with the fact that the might of the explosion from the azure-light gold frame umbrella was too terrifying. Under such circumstances, how could they dare to be careless? The only regretful aspect was that all the cultivators in the outside world were mere spectators. So, they were bound to be here just to watch the show, and when they witnessed such scenes occurring in succession, it felt very amusing and laughable to them. The Tao Cauldron world. Leng Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, and the others were silent, had unsightly expressions, and had almost gnashed their teeth into pieces. Perhaps they would feel much better if there were no outsiders watching the battle. Unfortunately, they didn't have to give it any thought to know that all the cultivators in the outside world had definitely witnessed every detail within these scenes. It was even to the extent that they faintly felt that those cultivators in the outside world were probably laughing, and it caused them to feel even more uncomfortable. Moreover, it was Xianxia whom had caused all of this. At this moment, they simply wished for nothing more than to immediately slice Xianxia into pieces and feed him to dogs. What should we do? Someone broke the silence. Yeah, if this continues, then what should we do? Could it be that we'll just continuously evading in such an embarrassing manner like this? In that way, we would definitely be utterly humiliated. Leng Xinghuan took a deep breath and worked hard to calm himself. and then he stared at the formation in the distance and said swiftly, "Look, the might of the divine formation is gradually weakening, and it's impossible to repair any longer. Obviously, Xianxia is powerless to turn the situation around, and that's why he has no choice but to utilize such despicable methods to deceive us." All of them raised their eyes to look over, and their expressions eased up greatly when they noticed that the situation really was as Lung Xinghuan had said. Under such circumstances, we just have to be more cautious. Damn it, why is it coming again? He just started speaking when Lung Xinghuan noticed to his shock that the Black Spirit sword had shot out explosively from the formation again, and its imposing aura was still so fierce and terrifying as before. Witnessing this scene simply infuriated Lung Xinghuan to the point of going berserk with rage and disregarding everything to attack. I can't take this anymore. I'll kill that bastard." Lung Xinghuan had restrained himself in the end, but someone else wasn't. A Power Seal disciple of the Divine Institute roared loudly, and then he seemed like a completely infuriated primeval beast as he withdrew a divine artifact and ferociously attacked the Black Spirit sword. Shit. For no rhyme or reason, Lung Xinghuan's heart jerked, and he wanted to stop this Power Seal disciple. But it was too late. Rumble. A world-shaking and deafening explosion resounded, and it swiftly surged through the heavens and the earth. One could clearly see that the Black Spirit sword hadn't been struck before an extremely terrifying radiance of lightning suddenly arose from it, and then it exploded in an instant. A violent torrent that carried the might to obliterate the world swept out towards the surroundings from it. This time, it had really exploded. The cultivators in the outside world were immediately unable to continue laughing, and they were extremely shocked in their hearts. On the other hand, when Lung Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, and the others witnessed this scene, they evaded it instinctively once more. However, that disciple of the Divine Institute that attacked furiously wasn't so lucky, and he was directly swept away by the chaotic flow of energy from the explosion and was eliminated. At this moment, no one in the outside world laughed, and all of their expressions changed indeterminately instead. They'd never imagined that Xianxia would actually sacrifice a natural spirit treasure again. Is such a price worth it? After all, Xianxia had sacrificed the azure-like gold frame umbrella just now, and it was the Black Spirit sword now. Even if both these natural spirit treasures didn't originally belong to Xianxia, the hearts of many cultivators in the outside world still hurt when they watched these natural spirit treasures being destroyed just like that. If it was them in Xianxia's place, they would probably rather be eliminated than destroy such treasures. You're going too far. Outside the formation, Donghuang Yinxian spat out a few words lightly. Every single word was like a blade that surged with killing intent as if he was utterly infuriated. Just yesterday, their Divine Institute still had 9 disciples within the Tao Cauldron world, yet 3 had been successively eliminated today. 2 had been swept by the might of the explosion from the azure-like gold frame umbrella, and the other had been eliminated by the explosion of the Black Spirit sword. Now, only 6 members of the Divine Institute remained when Donghuang Yinxian was included. At this moment, they even had 1 member lesser than the sovereign sect. Donghuang Yinxian was unable to accept this outcome. In the next moment, a strand of a strange, ancient and obscure fluctuation suddenly surged into appearance from Donghuang Yinxian's right palm, and it condensed into a completely square, heavy and simple book. As soon as it appeared, the heavens and the earth were suddenly illuminated while divine light filled the world. Strands of the tune of the Tao that sounded like the sounds of nature slowly arose from within the book. It seemed like the ancestors of the gods were chanting and explaining the profundities of all techniques during the absolute beginning of the world, and it was divine and grand to the extreme. It caused Donghuang Yinxian to seem like a supreme existence that controlled all Taos and was passing down the Tao to the world from atop an altar. He emanated an oppressive and dignified aura. The Divine Institute's Taishian Codex. This fellow has finally stopped concealing his strength. But I never expected that the Dean of the Divine Institute would actually pass this treasure down to him. Lung Xinghuan's heart shook while a cold glow surged within his eyes. The Taishian Codex. A formidable and mysterious natural spirit treasure that had always been in the possession of the Divine Institute's Dean. In the boundless years of the past, there had been countless rumors about this treasure. The most famous rumor was that the Taishan Codex contained 13 Taoist scriptures. Every single scripture was like a world, and it possessed supreme might. The 13 scriptures within the Taishan Codex represented 13 worlds and 13 forms of supreme might. The fact that others took most delight in talking about was that the final scripture in the Taishan Codex supposedly recorded the secrets of the Grand Tao from the last era. If one was able to comprehend these secrets, then one might even be able to break through the barriers of an era and pass through the past, present, and future at will. It allowed one to truly attain a state of great freedom and boundlessness. All of these rumors had undoubtedly covered the Taishan Codex in a layer of mysteriousness. But there was no doubt that this treasure was extremely formidable, and it surpassed ordinary natural spirit treasures. Unfortunately, in the boundless years of the past, the Taishan Codex has always been in the hands of a supreme existence like the Dean of the Divine Institute, so others had never been able to lay eyes upon it. At this moment, this mysterious and legendary precious treasure had actually appeared in Dong Huang Yinchuan's possession, so it instantly caused Lang Xinghuan and the others to be extremely shocked. It wasn't just all of them within the Tao Cauldron world, and a mighty and endless uproar had arisen in the outside world as well. How could they have imagined that the Dean of the Divine Institute would actually hand this treasure over to Donghuang Yinxian during the Tao discussion? For a time, the outside world seethed with excitement. This was the charm of the Taishan Codex. It was sufficient to shock the world as soon as it made an appearance. You Divine Institute really is willing to pay any price. When Ting's expression changed slightly, and she spoke coldly within Convergence Hall. Haha, you're too kind. Ji Songzi laughed lightly. Actually, tempestuous waves had arisen in his heart because even he didn't know that the Dean had actually given this treasure to Donghuang Yinxian. Humph! When Ting grunted coldly and didn't speak further. As for Huaikongzi, Lei Fu, and the others, all of them had fallen into deep thought. They'd similarly never imagined that the Divine Institute would have made such sufficient preparations this time. A strange, ancient, and obscure fluctuation ceaselessly effused out from the Taishan Codex in Donghuang Yinchuan's palm, and it was enshrouded with the glow of the Tao that illuminated the heavens and the earth in extremely holy light. Even if he was within the formation, Qianxi's eyes couldn't help but swiftly narrow when he witnessed this scene. Even though he hadn't recognized the origins of this treasure, he'd sensed an unusual aura from it. The Taishan Codex. Gu Yan and Tu Meng recognized it with a single glance instead, and they spoke with surprise. Is it very formidable? Qianxi frowned. Gu Yuan swiftly described the origins of this treasure, and he had a rare serious expression on his face. I never expected that the Divine Institute would actually take this treasure with them. What extravagance! After he found out about all of this, Qianxi couldn't help but become vigilant in his heart. He knew that even if he detonated a natural spirit treasure, it would probably be unable to do anything to his enemies. Because Donghuang Yinxian had obviously become utterly enraged at this moment and had withdrawn a precious treasure like the Taishan Codex. So, if he played the same old trick, then it would obviously be an utter waste of those natural spirit treasures. Yes, Qianxi had originally intended to persist until the end of the Tao discussion even if he had to sacrifice all the natural spirit treasures in his possession. But when he witnessed this scene, he instantly knew that he had to change his strategy. Both of you stay within the formation. I'll go experience the might of this treasure. Qianxi took a deep breath while a wisp of a firm expression flashed in his eyes. Remember, both of you are not allowed to take a step out of this formation no matter what happens. If you disobey me, then don't call me Martial Ancestral Uncle from today onward. As he spoke, he took a large stride forward and instantly vanished within the formation. Martial Ancestral Uncle is... Gu Yan and Tu Meng glanced at each other, and both were extremely anxious. How could they have imagined that Qianxi would actually decide to face so many opponents by himself? If any mishaps occur, then the consequences would be truly unimaginable. At this moment, both of them truly wished for nothing more than to charge out and fight by Qianxi's side. But both gave up dejectedly when they recalled Yang Ye's order, and they simply suffered to the extreme in their hearts. Don't be worried. Perhaps Martial Ancestral Uncle has his own way to deal with all of this. Gu Yan spoke in a low voice. Tu Meng cried. Of course. Actually, both of them were clearly aware that it was merely a form of self-consolation. Yet now they could only do this. Unfortunately, the worries in their hearts didn't decrease but increase instead. What does Xianxia intend to do? He wouldn't be thinking of resisting Lang Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, and the others by himself, right? Is this any different than courting death? Could it be that he intends to sacrifice himself to protect Gu Yan and Tu Meng? Looks like Donghuang Yinxuan's actions of withdrawing the Taishan Codex caused extraordinary pressure to descend upon him as well, and it caused him to have no choice but to step forward boldly at this moment. When they saw Xianxia take the initiative to step out of the formation, all the cultivators in the outside world couldn't help but be extremely surprised. They were unable to imagine exactly what had urged him to act in this way. After all, leaving the formation meant that he would have to face Lang Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, and all the disciples from both the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute. Under such circumstances, he was simply like a moth flying towards a flame. How could he possibly change the situation? What admirable courage! Lei Fu clapped as he spoke, and it was filled with ridicule. When Ting's expression grew even gloomier. Outside the formation, when they saw Xianxia make an appearance, Lang Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, and the others were surprised, and then they were overjoyed. That damnable bastard has been finally forced out. Clang. After he came out, Xianxia directly disregarded the others, and he withdrew the banished as his gaze shot out like a bolt of lightning and swiftly locked onto Donghuang Yinxian, who stood in the distance. Because at this moment, Donghuang Yinxian, who possessed the Taishan Codex, was clearly the most dangerous, and he gave Xianxia the most pressure. Xianxia, you've finally come out here. At this moment, Donghuang Yinxian actually started laughing. However, there was no happiness on his face at all, and it seemed murderous and icy cold to the extreme instead. He raised his head to look at the sky while he muttered, 2 hours remain. It's sufficient to eliminate you. That may not necessarily be the case. Xianxia said indifferently, even if all of you attack me together, it's still not likely that you would be able to accomplish that. The tone behind these words seemed to be calm, yet it felt extremely arrogant when it entered into the ears of Lang Xinghuan and the others, and they couldn't help but laugh coldly because of it. Everyone, give me 15 minutes of time to deal with this fellow myself. Donghuang Yinxian spoke indifferently. Lang Xinghuan and the others frowned. They didn't feel that a one-on-one battle was the best method at such a time. However, when they saw Donghuang Yinxuan's resolute expression, all of them stopped persisting and tacitly approved of this request. 15 minutes? Xianxia started smiling, extremely brilliantly even, especially when he heard that Donghuang Yinxian intended to fight him one-on-one. Xianxia really didn't know if he should say that Donghuang Yinxian was arrogant and too confident. Perhaps even 15 minutes would be too much. His voice hadn't finished resounding through the air when a wisp of seemingly material and seething killing intent surged into appearance around Donghuang Yinxian, and it shook the heavens and the earth and threw it into disorder. The Taishan Codex in his hand rumbled while emanating obscure and ancient rays of the Tao. It was like the earliest ancestors of the primeval times were chanting scriptures that could open the ears of the deaf and the eyes of the blind. The atmosphere was tense and murderous. At this instant, even the attention of the cultivators in the outside world had been drawn over by this scene, and they opened their eyes wide and were deeply afraid of missing even the slightest detail. One was Donghuang Yinxian, the eldest Power Seal disciple of the Divine Institute, and a peerless figure who possessed the most extraordinary natural talent amongst the Donghuang clan's direct line descendants. He was born with the dark Tao battle physique that was peerlessly rare, and he was considered to be the most outstanding disciple in the Divine Institute. Merely these titles alone made it obvious how dazzling and extraordinary he was. Yet now, he held the Taishan Codex in hand, and his might was so powerful that it could simply stand supreme amongst all the universe-enlightened ancestral god realm experts since the ancient times. He was peerless. The other was Xianxia, the junior brother of Oracle Mountain's Grand Lord, Wuxia. He risen to prominence a few tens of years ago, possessed an unfathomable cultivation, and had completed numerous world-shocking deeds. Moreover, he'd proved his strength a long time ago through numerous battles throughout these 3 months that the Tao discussion had been held for. Yet now, a battle was about to unfold between these two, and it was bound to be an unprecedentedly peak battle. At this moment, would anyone dare to disregard this battle? At this moment, the two of them were the center of attention of all. The atmosphere between them was murderous, and the battle would erupt at any moment. Bang! Donghuang Yinxian was the first to attack. He raised his fair and slender palm, while the Taishan Codex in his hand opened abruptly to reveal the first scripture within it. In an instant, blazing divine radiance shot into the sky, while the sounds of chanting surged through the heavens and the earth. This area instantly transformed into powder. It transformed into nothingness. Only endlessly terrifying glows of the Tao surged incessantly. Such a scene was simply no different than the obliteration of the world. Xianxia's eyes swiftly narrowed while a cold glow surged within them. His vital energy was stimulated to the point of suddenly seething as it circulated at full speed. It was a very dangerous aura. It was the first time he'd encountered such a formidable enemy since he participated in the Tao discussion, and Donghuang Yinxian could be said to be a formidable enemy that he'd rarely ever encountered in his entire lifetime. However, Xianxia was utterly unafraid. In these years of the past, he'd very rarely felt such pressure from someone at the same realm of cultivation. It wasn't that he was haughty, but his opponents were truly too weak. Yet now, being able to encounter an opponent like Donghuang Yinxian caused his desire for battle in his heart that hadn't fluctuated at all for a very long time to actually be aroused. It was like a volcano that had been sleeping for a long time, and it suddenly erupted at this moment. "World suppression, descend!" Donghuang Yinxian shouted. After that, the glow of the Tao that covered the sky seemed as if it had heard an order. It suddenly transformed into a row of ancient, obscure, and twisted words. These words were densely like raindrops, filled with profundities, brilliant, and imposing. Markings formed with the Tao were Tao markings. These Tao markings appeared one by one and converged densely in midair to form a true scripture that crushed down at Xianxia. At this instant, the heavens, the earth, the landscape, time, light, everything seemed to be deterred, subdued, and had been completely suppressed to the point they didn't even emanate a trace of fluctuation any longer. It seemed like everything would be suppressed and crushed before this scripture, and it didn't tolerate any existences that defied it, or else only death would be waiting for such an existence. This was world suppression. It came from the first scripture in the Taishan Codex, and it suppressed all things and crushed everything. Obviously, as soon as Donghuang Yinxian attacked, he'd utilized his strongest move with the intention of accomplishing his objective in one go and completely crushing Xianxia, the world suppression scripture. When they witnessed the terrifying and destructive might created by this attack, no matter if it was Lang Xinghuan or the cultivators in the outside world, their expressions had changed in unison. This is the might contained within the first scripture of the Taishan Codex. It's already capable of revealing such strength when utilized in Donghuang Yinxian's hands. Then how powerful would it be in the hands of a supreme figure like the Divine Institute's dean? Would Xianxia be able to resist this attack? The hearts of many had constricted, and they were unable to avoid feeling worried for Xianxia. The banished let out a clear howl that sounded like the roar of a dragon and rumbled with the tune of the Grand Tao. At the instant that Donghuang Yinxian had attacked ferociously and utilized the world suppression scripture, Xianxia's eyes had suddenly narrowed while he didn't hesitate at all to attack. At this instant, Xianxia's entire body blazed with divine radiance, and they transformed into a myriad of mysterious, blazing, and dazzling talisman markings that coiled around his body, causing him to reveal supreme divine might. Moreover, he waved the banisher that was droning without end, and it let out a deafening howl as it struck down. The profound heart sword technique, Ocean Cliff style. This was the most powerful and vast move in the profound heart sword technique. As soon as it appeared, it simply seemed like a river of stars was descending from the 9 heavens and dragged the energy of the heavens and the earth along with it. It rumbled as it crushed through space and shot over. Bang! The sword chi collided with the codex, causing the heavens and the earth to quake. It seemed like the entire world had been shaken and was on the verge of collapse. The terrifying force created by the collision caused Leng Xinghuan and the others to instinctively retreat successively as they were deeply afraid of being swept into it. Bang! 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 The victor of the collision wasn't decided in an instant, and it was like two colossal mountains were colliding continuously. Every single collision caused a rain of light to spray throughout the world while obliterating force swept towards the surroundings and turned everything before it into powder. Even if it was in the outside world, every single collision caused the hearts of those cultivators to be extremely shaken, and they gasped without end. The might of this battle was simply not like the strength that ought to be possessed by universe-enlightened ancestral god realm experts. It was too astonishing and inconceivable. Stomp! 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 In the end, under the astounded gazes of everyone, Xianxia couldn't help but take a few steps back successively. Every single step he took caused rifts to spread like spiderwebs in space, and these rifts swept out towards the surroundings without end. The strength of the impact she experienced was very obvious. Even though he seemed to be in a sorry state, she had resisted this strike in the end. He'd resisted the world suppression scripture on the first page of the Taishan Codex. In an instant, all the cultivators in the outside world opened their eyes wide. They were extremely shocked and filled with disbelief. He's that formidable? The pupils of Leng Xinghuan and the others constricted while they were similarly unable to believe that Xianxia's combat strength was actually so formidable to the point of forcefully resisting this attack. After all, in the last few hours, Xianxia had relied on his own strength to maintain the circulation of the 8 extreme divine formation in order to resist their all-out attacks, so he definitely suffered an extremely great consumption of his strength and energy. But it was precisely under such circumstances that Xianxia was still able to accomplish this, and this caused Leng Xinghuan and the others to be surprised and bewildered. Luckily, Wen Ting muttered in Converge Hall, but the worries in her heart hadn't dispersed much because this battle had merely just begun. Moreover, besides Donghuang Yinxian, Leng Xinghuan and the others were part of Xianxia's opponents. Under such circumstances, Xianxia had clearly fallen into a disadvantaged position during the first collision between him and Donghuang Yinxian, so how could Wen Ting not be worried? Of course, the battle had just begun, so it was mostly probing strikes, and no one could predict the final outcome. He actually blocked that strike. He does deserve his identity as a disciple of Oracle Mountain, but based on the circumstances, that's his limit. Qi Songzi judged in a casual manner, and his words were filled with a feeling superiority that victory was within his grasps. Wen Ting disregarded him again. At this moment, she was worried about Xianxia, so how could she have the mood to argue with him? Looks like utilizing the strength of the second level of the Sword Emperor realm is clearly slightly inferior. At this moment, Xianxia seemed to be extremely calm. If others knew what he was thinking, then they would probably be even more surprised. Because it was very obvious that Chen 11 hadn't utilized his strength at the third level of the Sword Emperor realm during that collision from before. In other words, that collision from before was merely a form of probing Donghuang Yinxuan's strength to Xianxia. No wonder you dared to come here by yourself. You really can feel conceited when you possess such strength, but it's still too weak to me. Donghuang Yinxian was clearly slightly surprised that Xianxia was able to resist his attack, but in next to no time, he smiled indifferently and recovered his calm. According to your current display, I wouldn't even need to use 15 minutes, and I would be able to eliminate you from the Dao Cauldron world within 3 moves. Donghuang Yinxian paused for a moment, and then his gaze shot over like a bolt of lightning and locked coldly onto Xianxia as he said, "So, you don't have a chance at all?" OM. As he spoke, the Taishan Codex in his hand emanated a strand and ancient fluctuation. It was enshrouded with the glow of the Tao, and it emanated strands of brilliant markings of the Tao. These markings seemed as if they were alive. They emanated a primitive, divine, and grand aura as they ceaseless converged, merged, transformed. In next to no time, one could faintly notice that a new scripture was being condensed into form. At this instant, The heavens and the earth returned once more to silence. All sound had vanished while only a scripture that emanated boundless divine might remained in the world. Compared to the world suppression scripture from before, this strike seemed even more terrifying, and it caused everyone in this area to feel a suffocating and oppressive aura. It was like the heavens, the earth, and everything within it would be destroyed and completely obliterated in the next moment. This was the might of the second scripture within the Taishan Codex, the light of world destruction. Everyone was shocked once more when they witnessed this scene, because they were clearly aware that if it was according to the might revealed by that attack from before, then Donghuang Yinxian was entirely capable of utilizing the world suppression scripture to obtain an advantage in the battle. But it just so happened that he hadn't, and he'd utilized the light of world destruction, which was even more formidable than the world suppression scripture. Obviously, it was just as Donghuang Yinxian had said. He clearly intended to eliminate Chen Shi in 3 moves and not give Chen Shi any chance to struggle. At this instant, a faint, piercingly cold glow surged in Chen Shi's black pupils, and his clothes and long hair fluttered with the wind while he didn't reveal any fear at all. Conversely, when he noticed the might of Donghuang Yinxian's attack, he felt that this was a matter of course. Because if Donghuang Yinxian merely possessed the might revealed by that strike from before, then that would truly disappoint Chen Shi. Chen Shi flicked the banisher while his sword insight shot into the sky, and his imposing aura became even more grand and fierce, causing the surroundings to be thrown into disorder. This time, he intended to take the initiative to attack because passively dealing with attacks wasn't Chen Shi's style. The battle was about to erupt at any moment. Everyone was able to sense that the atmosphere was tense and terrifying, and it pressed down upon them to the point they felt suffocated. However, right at this critical moment that was being watched by all, an unexpected event occurred. A miserable shrill cry resounded from extremely far away. It seemed to be so sudden, and it instantly caused the expressions of Lung Xinghuan and the others to change. "Shit! We're being attacked! Evade!" Clamorous exclaims resounded as the disciples of the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute seemed to have been shocked, and they roared loudly with rage while they evaded. It was an expanse of chaos there, and it caused Donghuang Yinxian's expression to become gloomy, cold, and indifferent to the extreme. He'd utterly never imagined that someone would actually spoil everything at such a critical moment. However, he was extremely unwilling to give up this opportunity to eliminate Chen Shi, so he was simply conflicted and furious to the extreme. Bang! However, to Donghuang Yinxian's surprise, Chen Shi had actually grabbed the opportunity presented at this moment and taken the initiative to attack. Space was swiftly sliced apart like a thin piece of paper being cut by an extremely sharp pair of scissors, and this wisp of sword chi Chen Shi executed was truly too swift and powerful. Moreover, it was murderous and precise to the extreme. It was like the sun, moon, landscape, everything in the world, and even the Grand Tao would be slashed apart by this strike and would be unable to bear the brunt of it. This was the profound heart sword technique's dismemberment style. It was a formidable strike that had been executed with Chen Shi's cultivation at the 3rd level of the Sword Emperor realm. Donghuang Yinxian was caught off guard, so he attacked instinctively, and he utilized the light of world destruction that had been accumulating strength since before. Bang! A terrifying and world-shaking sound of collision erupted. The heavens and the earth split apart while a rain of light sprayed into the surroundings, and indescribably terrifying torrents swept towards the surroundings. The impetus of this collision was so great that it even overpowered the chaotic battle in the distance, and it was terrifying to the extreme. Stomp! 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 This time, Donghuang Yinxian's expression changed indeterminately as he was blasted to the point of taking a few steps back. The outside world instantly erupted with a mighty uproar. This was the light of world destruction that was much more formidable than the world suppression scripture. Yet not only was it unable to harm Chen Shi, Donghuang Yinxian had actually been blasted back instead. Who would have dared to believe this earlier? Didn't this mean that Chen Shi wasn't as weak as he seemed earlier, and this was his true combat strength? The 3rd level of the Sword Emperor realm. Looks like everyone underestimated your strength. Donghuang Yinxian's expression was cold and indifferent to the extreme. He stared at Chen Shi for a moment before he puckered his lips and left in the end. The combat strength Chen Shi revealed caused him to be surprised and shocked. But most importantly, he was very clearly aware that he was utterly unable to do anything to Chen Shi in a short period of time. The reason was that the chaotic battle was still being carried out in the distance, and it was growing in intensity. Chen Shi didn't pursue Donghuang Yinxian, and his gaze shot over to the chaotic battle as well. It wasn't just the two of them. At this moment, the gazes of numerous cultivators in the outside world had been drawn over by the chaotic battle. The cause of the chaos was because a disciple of the sovereign sect had suddenly suffered a surprise attack and was instantly eliminated. Surprisingly, it was Ye Chen Yu Jihui and the disciples of the Tao Institute who had launched the surprise attack. It wasn't just the disciples of the Tao Institute that had arrived. Even Kong Yuran, Shi Yu, and the others from Nuo's Tao Palace had arrived as well, and they were in battle with the disciples of the Divine Institute. It was extremely chaotic indeed. Ye Chen's group were in battle with Lang Xinghuan's group from the Sovereign Sect, while Kong Yuran's group was in battle with those disciples from the Divine Institute. So the battlefield was chaotic to the extreme. Chen Shi couldn't help but feel slightly surprised when he saw this. He wasn't surprised by the arrival of Kong Yuran's group, and it was the Tao Institute's group that surprised him. They were actually in battle with the Sovereign Sect at this moment, and this seemed to be very unusual. Before this chaotic battle had erupted, the attention of practically all the cultivators had been drawn by the battle between Chen Shi and Donghuang Yinxian. So, when they saw Yi Chen Yu Jihui and the others suddenly rush over and eliminate that disciple of the Divine Institute, most of the cultivators finally realized what had happened and entered into an uproar. Some were regretful as they felt that this had interrupted the peak battle between Chen Shi and Donghuang Yinxian, and it was truly a pity. Some were shocked and were unable to figure out why the Tao Institute would act along with Nuo's Tao Palace and launch a surprise attack against the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute. Some felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. They'd clearly determined that such a situation had caused the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute to utterly lose the best opportunity to deal with Chen Shi. After all, less than 2 hours remained since the Tao discussion came to an end, yet such a chaotic scene had occurred. So, the advantage possessed by the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute had been completely undone, and they at least had to deal with Nuo's Tao Palace and the Tao Institute first before they could deal with Chen Shi's group. In short, the sudden eruption of this chaotic battle in the Tao Cauldron world had caused the situation to undergo a complete change. All of this were incidents that all the cultivators in the outside were unable to foresee. Chen Shi sized everything up with narrowed eyes, and he quickly determined the situation. Swoosh! Without any hesitation, his figure flashed and vanished on the spot. He charged into the group from Nuo's Tao Palace, and he helped them deal with those disciples from the Divine Institute. The group from Nuo's Tao Palace that was led by Kong Yuran and Shi Yu had already suppressed the disciples of the Divine Institute to the point of being on the verge of retreating in defeat. However, once Donghuang Yinxian gave up on his battle with Chen Shi and came over to assist them, the situation had been instantly turned around, and they matched the group from Nuo's Tao Palace in strength. However, when Chen Shi joined the battle, it instantly brought extraordinary pressure to those disciples of the Divine Institute. On the other hand, the disciples of the Tao Institute led by Ye Chen and Yu Jihui were in an extremely intense with Lang Xinghuan's group from the Sovereign Sect. Comparatively speaking, the Divine Institute was clearly in a disadvantaged position, and such a change in the situation caused all the cultivators in the outside world to be unable to avoid feelings of slight astonishment while their heads felt slightly muddled. The reason was that the battle that had erupted today were truly too inconceivable. In the morning, Tu Meng had been encircled by Lang Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, and the others, and then Chen Shi lent a hand and rescued Tu Meng. After that, Chen Shi set up a formation, resisted Lang Xinghuan and Donghuang Yinxian's groups while the groups from the Tao Institute and Nuo's Tao Palace fought. Later on, Chen Shi left the formation by himself and took the initiative to meet Donghuang Yinxian in battle, and then this chaotic battle erupted. All of these battles were dangerous to the extreme and inconceivable to the extreme. They were filled with unpredictable and unexpected events. For example, No one had imagined that, even under a situation where he was carrying the heavily injured Gu Yan, Xianxia had still been able to rescue two Meng who had been encircled. Similarly, no one had imagined that Xianxia would have been able to persist for numerous hours and prevent Leng Xinghuan and Donghuang Inchuan's groups from succeeding while relying solely upon a divine formation. A further example was that the groups from the Dao Institute and Nuos Dao Palace were in conflict just a little while ago. But now, they'd actually tacitly joined forces to attack the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute, and they'd resolved the danger that Xianxia faced. All of this was filled with variables. Not to mention those cultivators in the outside world. Even Xianxia and all the others who were still in battle now had probably never imagined that such an unexpected event would actually occur at the final moments before the Dao discussion came to an end. It was simply filled with unpredictable changes. In short, the intense and chaotic battle that was being carried out now had imperceptibly drawn the attention of all the cultivators in the outside world. Everyone was very clearly aware that the moment this chaotic battle came to an end might also be the moment that this round of the Dao discussion came to an end, or vice versa. 10 minutes later, a disciple of the Divine Institute was eliminated by Xianxia's attacks. The reason he was able to accomplish this was that Kong Yuran, Shi Yu, and the others had helped him resist most of the attacks from Donghuang Inxian and the other disciples from the Divine Institute. Bang! Convergence Hall. When he witnessed this scene, Qi Songzi, whose expression had turned extremely gloomy a long time ago, was unable to endure the rage in his heart any longer, and he slapped the table before him into pieces, causing bits of wood to spray towards the surroundings. He'd actually lost his composure to such an extent in public, and it clearly showed how aggrieved and infuriated he was in his heart. The sovereign sect's Lei Fu had a gloomy expression as well, and he remained silent. Actually, it was very understandable. When their sovereign sect and Divine Institute had joined forces to deal with Xianxia before this chaotic battle had erupted, they were in a completely advantageous position. But it just so happened that this chaotic battle had suddenly erupted and thrown everything into disorder when it wouldn't be long before they were able to eliminate Xianxia's group of three, causing them to utterly lose the advantage they had. Now, even a disciple of the Divine Institute had been eliminated, so how could Qi Songzi accept this? The matters of the world really are unpredictable and ever-changing. When Ting sighed with emotion, and the faces of Qi Songzi and Lei Fu turned even gloomier when they heard this. After the time for an incense stick to burn, one of the disciples of the Dao Institute was unexpectedly caught off guard, and he was eliminated by Leng Xinghuan. As soon as this scene occurred, it immediately destroyed the equally matched situation they were in, and it caused the Dao Institute to fall into a disadvantaged position. Xianxia acutely noticed this. He pondered deeply for a brief moment before his figure flashed, and he actually left the group from Nuos Dao Palace to attack Leng Xinghuan's group. No matter what, if Ye Chun and Yu Juhui hadn't lent a hand on that day, then Gu Yan would have probably been eliminated. So, under such circumstances, Xianxia would naturally not turn a blind eye to the situation Ye Chen's group was in. Xianxia's unusual actions didn't just cause the members of Nuos Dao Palace to be stunned. Even the disciples of the Dao Institute, Sovereign Sect, and Divine Institute couldn't help but be surprised. In next to no time, Ye Chun and Yu Juhui came to an understanding that Xianxia was repaying their kindness from before. However, the expressions of Li Lufeng and the others were slightly colorful when they saw this. During these 3 months of the Dao discussion, they'd entered into conflict with Xianxia on more than one occasion. Now, when they saw such an enemy had come to help them, the surprise and disbelief they felt was obvious. On the other hand, Xianxia's actions didn't just simply cause the disciples of the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute to feel infuriated. It was even like a signal. It caused them to instantly suspect whether the Dao Institute had formed an alliance in secret with Nuos Dao Palace and Oracle Mountain. Otherwise, why would the Dao Institute arrive here with Nuos Dao Palace and interrupt their plans to deal with Xianxia? Now, Xianxia had actually taken the initiative to assist the Dao Institute, so how could others not doubt the relationship between these three powers? What a scheme! Good. Very good. Lei Fu couldn't restrain himself any longer, and he started laughing from extreme rage while he looked at Huai Kongzi with an icy cold gaze. Obviously, he'd started to doubt the exact role that the Dao Institute was playing during this Dao discussion. Huai Kongzi sighed in his heart. After all, even he himself was slightly astounded and was unable to imagine that all of this would occur. The Tao discussion is about to come to an end. At such a moment, even the disciples of my Tao Institute hope to seize even more ancient Tao engraved cauldrons. In my opinion, there's nothing wrong with all of this. Hui Kongzi took a deep breath and spoke in a low voice. Could it be that only the disciples of your powers are allowed to seize the cauldrons from the disciples of my Tao Institute, yet the disciples of my Tao Institute can't counterattack? That's unreasonable. Lei Fu spoke coldly. Fellow Taoist Hui Kongzi, you ought to be clearly aware that I'm not talking about that. Hui Kongzi's eyes narrowed. Yet he didn't say anything in the end. He couldn't be bothered to provide an explanation because all the cultivators in 10 Direction City were able to discern right and wrong. So, the fairness of the Tao discussion would naturally receive a fair public opinion. I never expected that your young martial uncle's methods are so superb. Perhaps it was unintended, but his actions have imperceptibly dragged the disciples of the Tao Institute to the opposite side of the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute. Yuzhen spoke via voice transmission, and she puckered her lips while chuckling. Moreover, her eyes were filled with admiration. I believe that young martial uncle didn't think so much about it. As it said, a favor should be returned with a favor. Gu Yen had been rescued by those disciples of the Divine Institute, so young martial uncle would naturally not forget this kindness. When Ting spoke flatly, actually, she was clearly aware that Xianxia's actions could be seen as killing two birds with one stone. So she didn't repudiate Yuzhen's opinion. The cultivators in the outside world discussed animatedly while the chaotic battle was still going on in the Tao Cauldron world. With Xianxia's assistance, the battle between the disciples of the Sovereign Sect and Tao Institute had become equally matched once again, and it was even to the extent that the Tao Institute occupied a trace of an advantage. But it was impossible to eliminate a disciple of the Sovereign Sect in a short period of time. On the other side, the battle between Nuwas Tao Palace and the Divine Institute had finally into an equally matched situation as well. No one was able to do anything to the other. As time gradually passed by without them noticing, and under the anxious gazes of all the cultivators in the outside world, merely less than 45 minutes remained before the first round of the Tao discussion came to an end. But up until now, even though the battle was extremely intense, not a single disciple had been eliminated, causing it to seem extremely inconceivable. But if one analyzed the battle carefully, all of this would be within reason. For example, the Sovereign Sect had a total of 6 disciples, the Divine Institute had 5, the Tao Institute had 8, Nuwas Tao Palace had 7, and Oracle Mountain had 3. However, Oracle Mountain's Gu Yen and Tu Meng hadn't participated in the battle. On the other hand, even though the Tao Institute had numerous disciples, it was clear that besides Ye Qin, Yu Zhihui, and Li Lufeng, the combat strengths of all the remaining disciples was comparatively inferior. On the other hand, while the disciples of the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute seemed fewer, all of them that were able to persist until now were extremely formidable existences, so they didn't reveal any inferiority in the battle. Nuwas Tao Palace was probably the power with the most balanced combat strengths, and only Kong Yuran and Shi Yu seemed to be outstanding. So, the disciples of the Tao Institute were merely able to gain a trace of an advantage in this chaotic battle upon obtaining Xianxia's assistance, yet it was extremely difficult for them to eliminate their opponents. The battle between the disciples of Nuwas Tao Palace and the Divine Institute was roughly similar. Perhaps it was precisely because he'd noticed that such a situation was impossible to overturn in a short period of time. Lung Xinghuan suddenly shouted loudly during the last 15 minutes before the Tao discussion came to an end. Everyone, there's no point in continuing this battle. Why don't all of us stop? When he spoke these words, Lung Xinghuan was extremely furious and unwilling in his heart. The reason for this was extremely simple. It was originally a battle where they occupied an absolute advantage while Qianxi's group was about to be eliminated. Yet such a chaotic battle just had to occur. Not only did it make them utterly lose the advantage they possessed, they'd even lost a companion by way of a surprise attack. How could Lung Xinghuan not be infuriated by this? However, regardless of how unwilling or angry he was, he could only accept this situation before him. Because it was just as he'd said, continuing the battle was utterly meaningless. Firstly, it was because none of them could do anything to the other. Secondly, it was because only 15 minutes remained before the Tao discussion came to an end. No matter how they fought in this little bit of time they had, it would be utterly impossible to change the situation. It wasn't just Leng Xinghuan. Actually, everyone including Donghuang Inxian, Yechen, Yu Jihui, Kong Yuran, Shiyu, and Chen Shi had realized this as well, and they simultaneously chose to stop the battle. Actually, even if all of this was disregarded and they continued fighting with their lives on the line, then the price they paid would absolutely exceed the results they obtained. It was really not worth it. After all, it was only the first round of the Tao discussion. No one was willing to be eliminated and lose their chance to enter the second round at a time like this. The battle stopped abruptly. An extremely large area in the surroundings had been transformed into an expanse of ruins. Everything was destroyed, and it was a horrifying sight. The blood-red setting sun gradually descended from the sky while it covered the heavens and the earth in a wisp of red. The group from the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute had converged once more. They hadn't left, and they chose to rest on the spot. Similarly, Chen Shi, Kong Yuran, Shiyu, and the others from Nuwas Dao Palace had converged and headed towards the 8 Extreme Divine Formation. At this moment, Ye Chun and the others from the Tao Institute seemed to be in a slightly tricky situation. They hadn't gathered together with Chen Shi's group, and they resided by themselves at another area. Obviously, they were still trying their best to maintain the Tao Institute's neutral attitude, even if many people doubted their neutrality. No matter what, even though the battle had ended, the atmosphere was still tense and heavy. All of them were vigilant against each other and didn't dare fully relax. When they witnessed such a scene, all the cultivators in the outside world were astounded. They were unable to understand why an extremely intense and chaotic battle would turn into something like this. In next to no time, the sounds of discussion resounded in the surroundings, and all of them had different opinions as they guessed the reason for all of this. It's very clear that there isn't enough time. The first round of the Tao discussion is about to come to an end, so it's meaningless to continue fighting like this. Exactly. In their opinions, perhaps only the second round is the true place that they compete. Under such circumstances, none of them would be willing to sacrifice themselves for nothing. In the end, most cultivators arrived at a consensus, and they understood why the disciples of the 5 great powers had stopped the battle. Convergence Hall. I never expected this. I truly never expected this. Lei Fu sighed while his voice emanated a wisp of unwillingness and anger that couldn't be concealed. Qi Songzi had a livid expression, and he puckered his lips and remained silent. Both of them were unable to accept such an outcome, because since before the Tao discussion had even begun, they'd confirmed their target and laid down the most precise plan they could create, and all of it was done for the sake of eliminating Chen Shi. However, the God of Destiny made a fool of them and made such an unexpected event to occur on the last day of the Tao discussion, causing them to fail on the verge of success. So, how could they accept this? Once Chen Shi entered the second round of the Tao discussion, then no matter what sort of results he obtained, he would still possess the qualifications to enter the forgotten grounds of chaos. This was something that they were absolutely unwilling to see happen. So, no matter if it was Lei Fu or Qi Songzi, both of them seemed so unwilling and furious when they witnessed this scene. If it's in terms of the number of ancient Tao engraved cauldrons, then your Nuwas Dao Palace is the biggest winner this time as it has obtained an entire 6 cauldrons. Congratulations. Suddenly, Wen Ting congratulated. Presently, amongst the 25 cauldrons, 6 were in the possession of the Sovereign Sect, 5 belonged to the Divine Institute, the Tao Institute had 5, Nuwas Dao Palace possessed 6, and Oracle Mountain held 3. Based on this, Nuwas Dao Palace clearly occupied a slight advantage just like the Sovereign Sect. The Divine Institute and Tao Institute were just below them, and Oracle Mountain was at the bottom. It was all thanks to your young martial uncle for giving us an extra cauldron. Yuzhen smiled. She'd clearly noticed that Chen Shi had seized a cauldron from a disciple of the Divine Institute during the battle, and he'd given it to the members of Nuwas Dao Palace. If we had a use for it, then we wouldn't have allowed your Nuwas Dao Palace to benefit. When Ting teased, causing Yuzhen to be unable to help but chuckle. The two of them spoke happily and disregarded the others, causing the expressions of Lei Fu and Qi Songzi to become even gloomier. Actually, if it was in terms of the final result, then their sovereign sect and divine institute's results weren't bad. Unfortunately, Lei Fu and Qi Songzi didn't attach importance to this. At this moment, Huai Kongzi heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. He was already very satisfied that the disciples of the Tao Institute were able to obtain 5 cauldrons during this competition with the other 4 powers. As for Lei Fu and Qi Songzi's anger, he'd directly disregarded it. Fellow Taoist Huai Kongzi, this round of the Tao discussion will come to an end in a short moment. I wonder how they'll be competing in the second round. When Ting suddenly turned around and asked this question, Huai Kongzi was stunned. He thought for a moment and then decided to be frank. He said in a solemn and deep voice, "After the first round comes to an end, the 25 disciples will be provided some time to rest and recuperate. During this period of time, the dean of my Tao Institute will preside over everything else. The Tao Institute's dean will be personally stepping forward." It wasn't just Wen Ting who was shocked upon hearing this. All the others in the hall felt the same because it had exceeded their expectations. Even those instructing elders of the Tao Institute who resided within the hall seemed to have not obtained any information about this, and they revealed surprised and bewildered expressions when they heard Huai Kongzi. There's probably a reason for this. At this moment, practically everyone sensed a trace of unusualness from these words. "Thank you." She gazed at Kong Yuran, Shiryu, and the others as he spoke seriously. "Don't worry about it. Nuos Tao Palace and Oracle Mountain have had a close relationship, so helping each other is a matter of course." Kong Yuran smiled lazily and seemed extremely charming. Shiryu glared at Chun Shi instead. "Stop being polite with us, you're making it seem like we're outsiders. I'll definitely punish you by making you eat and drink for 3 days after the Tao discussion comes to an end." Chun Shi couldn't help but chuckled. After that, he said to Yechen and Yu Jihui who were in the distance, "Thank you." Yechen and Yu Jihui were clearly stunned, and then Yechen waved his hand and said, "Don't think too much about it. I only did that for the sake of seizing even more cauldrons." Chun Shi nodded. "I understand." These conversations weren't conducted via voice transmission, so Lung Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, and the others heard it clearly, causing their expressions to turn slightly unsightly. Meanwhile, Gu Yan and Tu Meng walked out from within the formation. Chun Shi couldn't help but sigh in his heart upon seeing them because the other power still had numerous disciples here, yet only his Oracle Mountain had merely 3 disciples remaining within the Tao Cauldron world. Moreover, 2 of them were heavily injured. So, Chun Shi was utterly unable to arouse any happiness in his heart. Moreover, the cause of all of this wasn't the weakness of the disciples from the Oracle Mountain, and it was the plot of the Sovereign Sect and the Divine Institute. Chun Shi would never forget everything he'd encountered during the past 3 months. When he thought up to here, a wisp of piercing coldness couldn't help but arise in Chun Shi's eyes, and then he suddenly gazed at Lung Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, and the others who resided in the distance. "What? You still want to fight?" Lung Xinghuan frowned while his voice carried a wisp of coldness. "A price has to be paid for some things. Perhaps this round of the Tao discussion is about to come to an end, but I really look forward to battling all of you until the end during the second round." Chun Shi remained silent for a moment before he spoke calmly. He'd never liked to verbally threaten others, but he wanted to tell them that he, Chan Shi, would never forget what had occurred during these 3 months of time. He wanted them to clearly feel and understand the rage and resolution in his heart. In this way, they would be even more fearful and horrified when he took revenge. Lung Xinghuan, Donghuang Yinxian, and the others were stunned when they heard this, and then they started laughing from extreme rage. "That damnable bastard! It's already really good that we aren't going to look for trouble with him, yet he actually dares to speak arrogantly. He's simply running wild. All right, I'll be waiting for you." This was Lung Xinghuan's answer. His words were concise, yet every single word he spoke carried extremely ghastly killing intent. Once enmity is formed, it isn't so easy to resolve, unless the other party is killed. I look forward to that day. This was Donghuang Yinxuan's reply. It seemed to be even more terrifying. Moreover, it sounded like even if the Tao discussion came to an end, he would continue pursuing Xianxia without end so long as Xianxia remained alive. Hearing these words caused Kong Yuran, Shiyu, Guyen, Tumeng, and the others to frown, and they were just about to speak when they were restrained by Xianxia. Arguments were bound to be meaningless. Everything had to be resolved with strength. That fellow really is arrogant. But such a temper is truly agreeable. Yet Chen noticed everything from afar, and he couldn't help but feel admiration towards Xianxia's courage. The setting sun was about to descend completely, and the veil of night was about to descend. Right at this moment, a wave of strange fluctuation suddenly arose within the Tao cauldron world, while circle after circle of extremely grand and mysterious ripples arose in the sky. At practically the exact same moment, Hui Kongzi's dignified and indifferent voice suddenly resounded through the heavens and the earth. The first round of the Tao discussion has come to an end. The disciples who have obtained ancient Tao engraved cauldrons will be teleported into my Tao Institute's ancient springtime realm to recuperate and prepare for the second round. Those disciples that were unable to obtain cauldrons will be directly eliminated from the competition. As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia and the other 24 disciples who possessed the cauldrons felt their vision turn black. And then their figures were uncontrollably enveloped by a strand of enormous force before they swiftly vanished on the spot. On the other hand, even though the other disciples who didn't possess cauldrons had persisted until now, they were regretfully eliminated from the Tao discussion. This round of the Tao discussion came to an end at this moment. Practically all the cultivators in the outside world heaved long sighs when they witnessed this scene, and they relaxed completely.